The shadow before history. There are moments in human memory when the past feels close enough to touch, when the dust of forgotten worlds seems to rise again, whispering of civilizations far older, far stranger, and far more sophisticated than we were ever taught to imagine. For generations, our story has been presented as a clean, orderly ascent. Hunters became farmers, farmers became city builders, and from that lineage emerged Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, and all the others we comfortably call the first civilizations. But what if that story is only the final chapter of a saga that stretches back into a darkness we barely understand? What if beneath the ruins we can see lie the ruins of something much older? This is the question that has quietly unsettled archaeologists, researchers, and explorers for decades, though few dare to speak it openly, because to ask it is to pull at a thread woven through the very foundations of human history. It is to challenge timelines carved into textbooks, museum displays, and the accepted architecture of academia. And yet, evidence, small at first, then growing, multiplying, overlapping, keeps surfacing. Evidence that refuses to fit neatly into the official narrative. Like Göbekli Tepe, an impossibly ancient sanctuary built nearly 6,000 years before the Egyptian pyramids, long before humans were supposed to have mastered agriculture, architecture, astronomy, or organized religion. Massive stone pillars weighing tons, arranged in circles, carved with animals and symbols whose meaning remains elusive. An entire complex deliberately buried by the very people who built it, as if preserving it for another age or hiding it from one. Or Çatalhöyük, a vast honeycomb-like megacity with no streets, where people lived in an interconnected labyrinth of rooftop passages. A city thriving in 7400 BCE, long before cities were thought to exist. Complex rituals, wall paintings, shrines, and social structures far too advanced for its time. And yet it stands without a clear origin, as if it appeared fully formed and then vanished. Or the underground cities of Derinkuyu, catacombs so deep that some reach 11 levels below the earth, ventilated with perfect engineering, capable of sheltering tens of thousands of people. Who built them? When? And why such enormous underground networks at a time when, according to the standard timeline, humanity was still struggling with primitive settlement? At first glance, these anomalies appear disconnected, points of light scattered across the prehistoric darkness. But as we look closer, as we trace the lines between them, something unexpected begins to emerge. A shape, a pattern, a rhythm in human antiquity that suggests cycles of rise and collapse, far older than the ones we know. Because long before bronze, before writing, before kings and empires, there are signs of civilizations that flourished and disappeared, leaving behind only scattered fragments, submerged cities on once coastal lands, megalithic sites predating agriculture, stone architecture that should not exist in eras of hunter-gatherers, and where ruins cannot be found, hints remain in myths, oral traditions, and geological scars carved by forgotten cataclysms. Take Doggerland, the drowned land beneath the North Sea. Not just a land bridge, but an entire region where rivers flowed, forests grew, and people thrived for thousands of years. Then, almost abruptly, it was swallowed by rising seas at the end of the last ice age. The remnants show organized settlements, tools, and what may have been early proto-communities wiped out by a geological shift so sudden that entire cultures could have been erased without leaving a trace. Or the Indus Valley civilization, Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, where urban planning reached a level of sophistication unmatched for millennia. Grid-aligned streets, advanced sewage systems, standardized weights, hydraulic engineering, and no evidence of kings, wars, or imperial hierarchy. A society that seems to have mastered stability, governance, and technology until it simply ceased to exist. No mass graves, no signs of conflict, only an enigma that grows deeper the more we learn. And then, of course, there's the mysterious Bronze Age collapse, one of the greatest global disasters in human history. A moment around 1200 BCE when empires fell like dominoes, the Hittites, Mycenaeans, Minoans, Egyptians, and nearly every major culture across the Mediterranean. Entire languages vanished. Writing systems disappeared. Trade networks that had connected continents for centuries dissolved. Was it invasions? Climate change? Earthquakes? Volcanoes? A combination? Or was it something we still haven't considered? Something that rippled across the world and wiped the slate clean? These patterns raise uncomfortable questions. Why do civilizations appear suddenly, fully formed, and then vanish just as quickly? Why do advanced technologies emerge in periods that should not have produced them? Why do so many cultures, from the Maya to the Sumerians to the Greeks, speak of ages before the present one, cycles of creation and destruction, worlds drowned by floods or burned by fire? Could they be memories of real events, echoes of lost societies now buried under oceans, deserts, or layers of time too deep to excavate? We may never find a single definitive answer, but the more we dig, literally and figuratively, the less convincing the old timeline becomes. Instead of a smooth ascent, we see a jagged landscape of forgotten rises and catastrophic falls. Human history begins to look less like a straight line and more like a heartbeat. And that leads us to the core mystery. What really happened to the first civilizations on Earth? Were they merely primitive cultures that dissolved naturally into the march of time? Or were they part of a much earlier cycle of human advancement, one erased by forces we still struggle to understand? As we step deeper into the labyrinth of forgotten worlds, we find that every answer opens a new question. Every discovery reveals a new contradiction, and every ruin, whether carved from stone or swallowed by the sea, seems to whisper the same haunting truth. We are not the first. But what came next would challenge everything we think we know about the dawn of civilization. Because once we accept the possibility that we are not the first sophisticated culture to walk the earth, we must confront an even more unsettling question. Where did they all go? How can entire societies, ones capable of architecture, astronomy, engineering, and complex spiritual systems, vanish from the historical record so completely that only faint fingerprints remain? To explore this question, we must travel not just through geography, but through layers of geological time, layers shaped by water, fire, ice, and unthinkable violence. Layers that humanity has only begun to peel back in the last century. The first revelation is deceptively simple. Most of human history is missing, not figuratively, literally. More than 90% of all archaeological sites that ever existed are estimated to be gone, dismantled by erosion, buried under silt, crushed beneath tectonic movement, or drowned by rising seas at the end of the last ice age. If humanity had built cities along ancient coastlines, and we have every reason to believe they did, those cities now lie under hundreds of feet of water, hidden beneath sediment thousands of years thick. This means our understanding of the first civilizations is inevitably skewed toward what survived on high ground. But civilizations do not typically form on mountaintops. They grow along coasts, rivers, and fertile deltas, precisely the areas reclaimed by oceans between 20,000 and 7,000 BCE. In other words, the world we can excavate is only the upper accidental fragment of a much larger story. But even within that fragment, strange pieces stand out. Take Göbekli Tepe. Its existence alone suggests a level of social organization, artistic sophistication, and astronomical awareness utterly out of place for 9600 BCE. This was a time when humanity was supposedly still wandering in nomadic bands. Yet here we find architects who could quarry, transport, erect, and align megaliths weighing 40 to 60 tons. Who taught them to do that? And why does Göbekli Tepe show no signs of being an experiment or transitional structure? It appears refined from the start, as though its builders inherited knowledge rather than invented it. Then, after millennia of use, the site was buried, intentionally and meticulously. Why would Stone Age people bury their most sacred and monumental architecture? What were they preserving or protecting from the next age? Or consider Çatalhöyük, with its dense grid of interconnected homes, vibrant murals, and communal spaces. It does not resemble an early village, but rather the remains of a mature urban culture. Yet it has no clear predecessor, no earlier settlements from which it evolved. It simply emerges around 7400 BCE, with a level of complexity that implies generations of development we cannot find. And when we shift our gaze underground, the questions compound. The subterranean cities of Derinkuyu and Göbekli, carved deep into volcanic rock with precision and massive ventilation systems, are anomalies at every level. Their engineering surpasses expectations of the Neolithic or even early Bronze Age. They appear to have been built not as storage tunnels or temporary shelters, but as complete functional cities. Kitchens, wells, living spaces, stables, wineries, and escape routes. What kind of threat forces a culture to retreat 10 or 11 stories beneath the earth? Climate disaster? War? Radiation? Ash-choked skies? Or was Derinkuyu not built in a moment of desperation, but inherited from an even earlier epoch when subterranean construction served a purpose we no longer understand? And if all this suggests that ancient cultures may have had knowledge we cannot trace, the pattern deepens when we examine the Indus Valley civilization. Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro exhibit standardized architecture, advanced drainage, careful urban planning, and long-distance trade networks. Yet they lack the hallmarks of typical ancient empires: palaces, temples, standing armies, ruling classes. It is as if an advanced but decentralized society flourished and then evaporated without leaving signs of violent collapse. How does an entire civilization disappear without war, invasion, or massive fires? Could natural shifts in climate have slowly eroded their way of life? Or could a deeper, older cycle have been repeating, a cycle in which civilizations rise to sophistication and then fade, leaving only silent stones behind? This brings us to a broader, more unsettling landscape: the drowned coastlines that ring the earth, where evidence suggests that entire prehistoric cultures might still lie hidden. Around the Bahamas, strange stone structures rest on the seafloor, precise blocks forming geometric alignments. Off the coasts of India, underwater surveys near Dwarka reveal ruins that may date back more than 9,000 years. Around Japan's Yonaguni Island, what appear to be terraced pyramids descend into the deep, though debate rages over whether they are man-made or reworked natural formations. In each case, the official explanations are simple: natural formations, misinterpretations, coincidence. But when the same kinds of anomalies appear in oceans across the world, from the Caribbean to the Mediterranean to the Pacific, how many coincidences does it take before the pattern becomes undeniable? And then there is Doggerland, once home to thousands, perhaps tens of thousands, of people, a lost land mass with rivers, lakes, and plains stretching between Britain and northern Europe. A place where prehistoric hunters, fishers, and early settlers lived until a combination of melting ice caps and a catastrophic undersea landslide known as the Storegga Slide triggered massive tsunamis that drowned the entire region. This single event did not just erase a landscape, it erased a cultural world. Entire traditions, stories, technologies, and ways of life disappeared beneath the waves. And if it could happen there, how many other Doggerlands lie hidden beneath the Atlantic, the Indian Ocean, or the once dry straits and shelves around every continent on Earth? The more we look, the clearer the picture becomes. Our planet has not been gentle with its inhabitants. Ice ages have come and gone. Sea levels have risen more than 400 feet. Volcanoes have darkened skies. Earthquakes have leveled cities. Shifts in climate have turned lush regions into deserts and deserts into thriving habitats. And with each transformation, entire cultures, advanced or not, could have been swallowed whole. So when we stand before the ruins, we can still see, what are we really looking at? The first chapters of human civilization, or merely the first chapters that survived? The evidence suggests we may be dealing not with a single origin point, but with cycles, civilizations rising, falling, disappearing, and perhaps passing fragments of knowledge forward like flickering torches. But if this is true, it leads us to a far more profound question, one that opens the door to our next mystery. If civilizations have risen before, far earlier than we once believed, what force keeps wiping them from the face of the earth? What comes next may bring us closer to the answer. The question lingers like a shadow stretching across time, unsettling and irresistible. Because to understand what happened to humanity's first great cultures, we must look beyond archaeology, beyond the comfort of stones and pottery and carbon dates. We must look into the moments when the earth itself turned violent, when nature became an enemy as formidable as any army. And strangely, the deeper we go into these forgotten epochs, the more we find that global catastrophes are not rare events scattered across history. They are recurring pulses, reshaping the world again and again. Consider the end of the last ice age, around 12,800 to 9,600 BCE, a period known as the Younger Dryas, marked by a sudden plunge in global temperatures followed by equally abrupt warming. Glaciers melted at unimaginable speed, sea levels surged, entire ecosystems collapsed, and somewhere within this chaotic window, humanity crossed from the deep prehistoric world into the beginnings of settled life. But here is where things become unsettling. The Younger Dryas was not a slow evolution, it was a shock. Something triggered the sudden cooling. Something triggered the sudden end of it. Something that left geological signatures across continents, a thin layer of black sediment called the black mat, containing traces of massive fires, carbon, and nanodiamonds microfragments associated with extreme heat. Some scientists propose a comet impact. Others argue for a fragmented meteor shower. Some suggest massive volcanic activity beneath the ice sheets. But whatever the cause, its effect was the same: destruction on a global scale. Land bridges vanished, coastal plains drowned, human populations shrank. Cultures living in regions now submerged beneath the Mediterranean, the Persian Gulf, the Sunda Shelf, and the Americas lost everything. And this raises a haunting possibility. Did earlier, unknown civilizations exist before this cataclysm, and were they erased by it? If they did, almost all their settlements would now lie underwater, lost beneath ancient shorelines. We would find only the remnants that survived on high ground, like the enigmatic sanctuaries at Göbekli Tepe, built precisely at the end of the Younger Dryas, as if marking the return of a world recovering from a disaster so devastating that memory itself fractured. What if these pillars are not the beginning of civilization, but the last monument of a culture trying to preserve what it remembered? This idea resonates when we look at Doggerland, a world swallowed not by one event, but by a sequence of climatic shifts and rising seas. Archaeologists have recovered tools, bones, and traces of settlement from fishing nets and dredging operations, evidence of communities that lived there for millennia. But then, around 6200 BCE, the Storegga slide triggered tsunamis up to 50 feet high, sweeping across the North Sea. Entire coastlines reshaped overnight. Imagine the knowledge that vanished, the stories, the maps, the technologies adapted to a land that simply no longer existed. People fled, carrying only fragments of their world with them, fragments that may have influenced the rise of later European cultures, yet without leaving clear archaeological footprints. Doggerland is not alone. Around the world, submerged continental shelves hide ancient landscapes. The Persian Gulf once held a vast fertile basin with rivers, lakes, and human habitation. The Sunda Shelf connected Southeast Asia, forming a massive continent home to tens of thousands of early humans. The continental shelf off India reveals straight walls, geometric structures, and hints of drowned settlements far older than official history allows. If these regions held cultures with proto-cities or advanced knowledge, the ocean has erased almost all trace of them. What remains on land may be the echoes of survivors, the refugees of a lost world. But the story of disappearance doesn't end with water, because even after the Ice Age stabilized, Earth remained volatile. The Bronze Age collapse, around 1200 BCE, is one of the clearest examples of how interconnected societies can fall together like a tightly woven fabric suddenly tearing. The Hittite Empire shattered. The Mycenaeans vanished. Egypt nearly collapsed. Trade routes that had united continents fell silent. Writing systems disappeared, and for centuries afterward, many regions entered a dark age. To this day, no single explanation fits the scale of the collapse. It was not just war, not just famine, not just earthquakes. It was as if multiple disasters struck at once: climate shifts, volcanic eruptions, migrations, and unknown forces converging in a single catastrophic window. If this could happen during a relatively well-documented era, how many collapses might have occurred in deeper prehistory? Collapses we cannot trace, because the cultures they destroyed left no writing, no monuments that survived erosion, no cities built on ground high enough to evade the rising seas. This is why some researchers quietly, cautiously, suggest that human civilization may not be a single rise, but a series of rises, peaks of advancement followed by plunges into obscurity. Knowledge gained, lost, and later rediscovered. Technologies invented, forgotten, and reinvented centuries later as if new. Architectural methods emerging fully formed without the expected evolutionary path that should precede them. Consider the sudden appearance of monumental architecture in Egypt and Mesopotamia. Consider the unexplained constellations encoded in ancient myths worldwide. Consider the global alignment of megalithic sites long before cross-continental contact is believed to have existed. Are these mere coincidences, or are they faint echoes of an earlier world? A world whose memory survived only through stories, symbols, rituals, and fragments of technology? Even mainstream archaeology acknowledges a troubling truth. The Earth's surface is constantly erasing itself. Wind, ice, tectonics, floods, and sand have destroyed far more than they preserved. The deeper the timeline, the more silent it becomes, not because ancient humans were primitive, but because their traces were vulnerable. So perhaps the real mystery is not why we lack evidence of early civilizations, but why we expect to find any at all. If a society flourished 20,000 years ago, could it survive the melting of ice sheets, the flooding of continents, the grinding pressure of glaciers, volcanic winters, or shifting coastlines? Could their cities resist 12,000 years of erosion? Could their knowledge survive except in symbols passed through oral traditions? Could their stories remain intact beyond myth? And if they were erased, how many times might this have happened? How many forgotten civilizations lie beneath our oceans? How many beneath deserts? How many crushed under mountains that did not exist when they were alive? The more we confront these questions, the more our timeline dissolves. History stretches, bends, folds, and begins to resemble something far more complex, a cycle rather than a line. But if the Earth repeatedly wipes the slate clean, what survives between cycles? What traces do the survivors carry into the next age? And could the earliest known civilizations, Egypt, Sumer, the Maya, have inherited fragments of a much older world? This perhaps is the most provocative idea of all. Not that ancient civilizations existed and vanished, but that the cultures we recognize as the first might not be first at all. They might be inheritors, caretakers of a broken legacy passed down through generations of disaster, migration, and memory. For centuries, we assumed that human civilization began around 3500 BCE, with writing in Sumer, pyramids in Egypt, cities along the Euphrates and Nile. But as we peel back the layers, a strange pattern emerges. Many of these early societies begin with knowledge they should not yet possess: advanced math, sophisticated architecture, precise astronomical systems, structured religious cosmologies that seem to recall events long predating the civilizations themselves. Where did all this come from? Let's start with the Sumerians. They appeared suddenly around 4000 BCE, seemingly without a slow developmental phase behind them. Their writing system, cuneiform, arrives fully formed. Their city-states rise quickly. Their understanding of astronomy is far too advanced for a culture allegedly emerging from simple villages. They chart the movements of planets. They track lunar cycles with mathematical precision. They encode timekeeping systems that feel inherited, not invented. Egypt tells a similar story. The earliest dynastic artisans and architects possessed techniques that peak at the beginning rather than at the end of the civilization. The Great Pyramid is still unmatched in alignment, precision, and structural design. How does a culture begin with its most advanced achievement? Why is the supposed timeline inverted? And then there are the Maya. Their calendar systems, eclipse predictions, and cosmic cycles suggest a legacy of observation far older than their recorded history. They spoke of previous worlds destroyed by water, fire, and darkness, echoes of global cataclysms mirrored in myths across the planet. It's as if each ancient civilization woke up with an inherited memory, a script written long before they could have crafted it. Could these be fragments of knowledge carried by survivors of earlier ages? People who remembered glimpses of a world erased by catastrophe? People who carried stories across continents as they fled rising waters, falling ash, or collapsing ecosystems? This idea becomes more compelling when we examine the global parallels in myth and oral tradition. Flood narratives appear in over 200 cultures worldwide. Stories of lost homelands swallowed by the sea appear in regions from Polynesia to the Mediterranean. Tales of skyfire, earth-shaking destruction, and worlds-ending cycles appear in the Vedas, in Greek mythology, in Native American legends, and in the sagas of Northern Europe. Are these coincidences, independent creations of imagination, or are they cultural memories of real events, events experienced by ancestors who lived through upheavals so traumatic they could never be forgotten? Archaeology, physics, geology, and comparative mythology may hold separate viewpoints, but their data points begin to blur together when placed side by side. Take Derinkuyu again. Was it built by a culture anticipating catastrophe? Its depth and complexity suggest preparation rather than experimentation, as if people knew they needed to escape something: extreme cold, extreme heat, invaders, or even solar radiation. And strangely, while many underground cities in the region appear connected, no one has found an evolutionary sequence explaining how these engineering techniques developed. It's as though someone already understood ventilation principles, air pressure differentials, and structural integrity at a high level. Inheritance, remnants of older knowledge, we cannot say for certain. Göbekli Tepe deepens the mystery. The site seems to encode animal phases, stars, and possibly constellations. Its builders knew symbolic systems and construction principles far beyond what their era should have allowed. And the act of burying it, a deliberate preservation, feels almost like a time capsule, a message across ages, a warning, a legacy, a memory entombed for a future generation that might one day need to remember a forgotten past. Then there's Çatalhöyük. Its complex social patterns, its symbolic shrines, its sophisticated craftwork all hint at cultural inheritance. Without streets, without hierarchical palaces, it suggests a communal structure that feels refined, not experimental. Could its people have carried memories or cultural frameworks from ancestors who lived in lands now drowned? Could their art be a faint echo of imagery that once adorned settlements long lost beneath the sea? Even the Indus Valley civilizations seem to hold hints of forgotten continuity. Their urban planning, their standardized measurements, their non-hierarchical society, these elements did not appear suddenly out of chaos. They imply a lineage, a cultural blueprint inherited from somewhere else. This is where the contradictions between the official timeline and archaeological discoveries begin to sharpen. The standard narrative requires slow progression, from small tribes to villages to towns to cities. But again and again, we find early sites exhibiting maturity, order, and sophistication from the start. It's not that these cultures lacked ancestors. It's that their ancestors are missing from the archaeological record. Missing because they were erased, missing because their lands are underwater, missing because time itself is not kind to memory, or missing because we have not yet stumbled upon their remains perhaps buried too deep, submerged too far, or eroded too completely. Science acknowledges that sea levels rose more than 400 feet at the end of the last ice age. That alone would erase tens of thousands of coastal sites, forcing survivors inland. Imagine what knowledge they carried. Imagine the stories they told. Imagine what their descendants encoded into rituals, symbols, and myths. Could the mysterious alignments in ancient architecture, alignments with solstices, equinoxes, and star systems, reflect memories of a world where astronomy was essential for survival? A world where knowing the sky meant predicting catastrophes? Could the sudden rise of writing systems reflect an urgent need to preserve knowledge that had already been lost once before? These questions lead to an even more intriguing thought. What if civilization did not begin once, but many times? What if cycles of creation, destruction, and rebirth define humanity's true story? If so, then the past is not simply a linear ascent from ignorance to knowledge. Instead, it is a vast landscape of forgotten heights and unexpected depths, peaks of advancement followed by dark ages where only fragments remained. And if fragments remain, then perhaps they can be found in myths, in ruins, in undersea structures, in anomalous artifacts that defy classification, in ancient texts that speak of worlds that existed before ours. But this also raises the next great mystery. What were these early cultures truly capable of? Did they possess technologies we no longer understand? Architectural principles we have yet to rediscover? Astronomical insights passed down in symbols rather than scrolls? To answer that, we must turn our gaze toward the most controversial pieces of the puzzle, the anomalies that challenge every assumption about what ancient humans could and could not do. And that is where our journey leads next. If forgotten civilizations rose and fell long before the empires we know, then we must ask the next inevitable question. What were these early cultures truly capable of? This is where the story turns uncomfortable for traditional archaeology, because scattered across the world, across continents, across eras, across cultural boundaries, lie structures, artifacts, and alignments that do not fit neatly into any accepted timeline. They sit like misplaced puzzle pieces, stubbornly refusing to disappear, even when the narrative demands they shouldn't exist. Let us begin with a simple but powerful truth. Ancient humans were as intelligent as we are. Their brains were the same size, the same structure. Their capacity for reasoning, innovation, and creativity was no different from ours. If our species has lived for hundreds of thousands of years, is it unreasonable to imagine that people before the last ice age could have developed knowledge, systems, or technologies now lost to time? Göbekli Tepe already challenges us with this possibility. The site's builders carved limestone pillars with detailed reliefs using tools we still do not fully understand. They transported multi-ton stones across considerable distances. They created architectural geometry that shows planning, coordination, and symbolic intention. And this was all done before agriculture was firmly established, before settled villages became common according to the standard timeline. How does a society that is supposedly nomadic mobilize hundreds of people for decades of large-scale construction? How do they organize food, labor, skill specialization, and engineering expertise without a stable urban base? And why does the quality of the stonework at Göbekli Tepe appear so refined, as if these were not the first monuments they ever built, but rather the last in a long, now invisible lineage? Çatalhöyük poses a similar mystery. Its tightly knit, streetless design is unprecedented in early human settlements. Homes were entered through rooftops, forming an interconnected maze that suggests a sophisticated understanding of community planning and perhaps even defensive strategy. But strangely, this urban model doesn't seem to evolve from simpler predecessors. It appears abruptly, with no transitional sites showing a gradual development of such complex architecture. Where, then, is the missing blueprint? Is it lost beneath silt and riverbeds, beneath collapsed landscapes, or beneath oceans that rose more than 400 feet after the Ice Age? If the true origins of complex settlement building lie beneath submerged coastlines, we may never recover them. Derinkuyu, however, stands apart from all these anomalies. Here we find not a city built on Earth, but a city carved inside it, 11 stories deep. A ventilation system so efficient that modern experts still marvel at it. Underground chambers large enough to house thousands. Wells that tap into aquifers without contamination. Rock-cut passages that demonstrate precise knowledge of structural integrity and airflow. And the entire network connected to other underground cities stretching across Cappadocia like veins beneath the skin of the earth. Who first conceived the idea of subterranean urban life? And for what reason? Fear? Climate catastrophe? Survival during an environmental collapse? Or was this knowledge inherited from an older culture that faced conditions we cannot imagine? Conditions that forced people below the surface? If Derinkuyu is a remnant of inherited knowledge, then its origins may lie far earlier than its conventional dating suggests. And if so, what else might lie beneath the layers of time waiting to be discovered? Turning from underground cities to coastal enigmas, a similar pattern emerges. Throughout the world, structures exist in waters where no ancient construction should be found. The so-called Bimini Road in the Bahamas, submerged ruins off the coast of India's Gulf of Cambay, the underwater terraces at Yonaguni in Japan, the megalithic formations off the coast of Malta, straight walls, right angles, precise blocks, geometric terraces, too deliberate to be dismissed easily, yet too ancient to fit comfortably within accepted timelines. Oceanographers, geologists, and archaeologists debate these structures fiercely. Some suggest natural formation. Others point to tool marks, alignments, and patterns that imply human intervention. But the greatest obstacle is not interpretation, it is time. If these structures predate known civilizations, they are older than the surviving historical record itself. And if they are older than the record, then they belong to a forgotten chapter. The anomalies extend beyond stone. Ancient maps, such as the Piri Reis map, show coastlines that should have been unknown to medieval cartographers, including pre-glacial outlines of Antarctica's shores beneath the ice. Is this coincidence? Imagination? Or did these map makers preserve fragments of cartographic knowledge inherited across millennia of retellings? Then there are the myths, those persistent, cross-cultural echoes of civilizations consumed by water. Atlantis in Greek lore, Kumari Kandam in Tamil tradition, Aztlan in Mesoamerican stories, Lemuria in Pacific legends. While none can be taken as literal history, their ubiquity raises questions. Why do so many ancient cultures speak of a great land that fell beneath the ocean? Why are these stories often tied to astronomical events or cycles of destruction? Were they metaphors or memories? Even the decline of the Indus Valley civilization provides its own strange clues. Here was a society that created standardized brick housing, drainage systems more advanced than those in some medieval cities, and city layouts that followed consistent mathematical proportions. Yet they left no temples, no grand palaces, no ostentatious monuments. It was almost as if their focus was not on elevating rulers, but on preserving a stable, efficient way of life. and when they disappeared, they did so quietly, without the marks of war or collapse. Could this be the final echo of a cultural legacy reaching back to a forgotten era, an era that learned the consequences of collapse and built a society focused on sustainability rather than monument? The more we study these anomalies, the more they point toward a deeper truth. The past was not simple. It was layered, complex, cyclical, shaped by forces that erased entire epochs and left only scattered stones to hint at what once was. Perhaps the technologies we now consider impossible for early cultures were simply rediscoveries. Perhaps ancient megalithic engineering, precise stone cutting, and astronomical alignment were skills passed down like ghostly memories, refined through ages, lost in catastrophes, and reborn in new civilizations that believed they were the first. But if that is the case, then we must ask the next, more profound question. What caused the final erasure? What force struck the world so deeply that nearly all traces of its earliest civilizations vanished? And why do the survivors' descendants seem to remember only fragments, myths, symbols, and warnings disguised as stories? In Block 6, we will descend into the heart of global catastrophe, altered climates, shifting continents, volcanic winters, and cosmic impacts, and examine how the Earth itself may have repeatedly reset the clock of human progress. If civilizations rose before, then the planet itself may have been their greatest adversary. This is the unsettling premise we now face, that Earth is not a stable cradle for human development, but a restless, shifting entity that periodically resets everything upon it. Cataclysms rise and fall like the breath of the planet itself. And if early civilizations truly existed, long before Egypt, long before Sumer, they would have lived under skies and across continents radically different from those we know today. To understand their disappearance, we must confront a difficult truth. Earth is a master of erasure. Stone crumbles, wood decays, metal oxidizes, entire landscapes vanish, the continents drift, volcanoes erupt, oceans rise, ice advances like a grinding machine, scouring everything in its path. If a civilization had existed 20,000 years ago, or 50,000 years ago, what would remain today? How much would survive 24 millennia of storms, earthquakes, erosion, sedimentation, and sea level change? The honest answer is inconvenient, almost nothing, and that forces us to reevaluate our assumptions. We often imagine that if an advanced culture had lived in deep prehistory, surely we would find clear signs of it. Steel, structures, tools, inscriptions. But this expectation ignores the scale of geological processes and the violent volatility of Earth's climate history. Let's begin with sea level rise, one of the most potent agents of cultural extinction. At the peak of the last ice age, oceans were more than 400 feet lower than they are today. Vast regions that are now underwater were once dry land, habitable, fertile, and ideal for settlement. When the ice melted, these coastlines disappeared, along with everything built upon them. Imagine the cities of today. Imagine New York, Shanghai, London, Mumbai, Tokyo, Rio de Janeiro, modern hubs of human civilization. Now imagine them submerged beneath hundreds of feet of water. In just a few thousand years, their towering structures would collapse, decay, and eventually dissolve into sediments. Even steel and concrete cannot resist geological time. What chance would a prehistoric culture have? Yet some relics survive, not cities intact, but subtle traces. The geometric patterns found off the coast of Malta, the submerged structures near India's Gulf of Cambay, the mysterious terraces of Yonaguni. These may not be definitive proof of lost civilizations, but they whisper of possibilities. Beyond rising seas, the Earth has wielded even more devastating forces. Volcanic winters. Massive volcanic eruptions can darken skies for years. The Toba super-eruption, around 74,000 years ago, is believed to have caused a volcanic winter that nearly wiped out early human populations. Ash layers from ancient eruptions reveal that the world has been plunged into darkness more than once. If a civilization flourished before such an event, what would remain afterward? Ash can blanket entire regions, collapsing buildings, smothering plant life, and poisoning water. A single eruption can reduce a thriving society to silence. Tectonic upheaval, mountains rise, valleys sink, earthquakes reshape the land in minutes. The forces that created the Himalayas, the Alps, and the Andes are not ancient relics. They are ongoing, and they have reshaped human settlements again and again. Some regions that are now deserts were once lush plains. Some plains were once shallow seas. Some islands did not exist a few thousand years ago. Others have drowned. How many ancient settlements lie buried beneath lands that rose through tectonic uplift? How many were swallowed by faults tearing the land apart? Cosmic impacts. Then there is the sky. We tend to think of cosmic impacts as rare, catastrophic events reserved for dinosaurs and Hollywood scripts. But the Earth has been struck by countless meteorites throughout its history. Even smaller impacts can devastate regional civilizations, destroying ecosystems, triggering tsunamis, and igniting global fires. Some researchers propose that the Younger Dryas cooling, an abrupt and mysterious climatic collapse around 12,800 years ago, may have been caused by a fragmented comet impact. If so, that event alone could have wiped out any advanced culture existing along the coastlines of that era. If their cities were built near water, like nearly every known civilization, they would now lie beneath sludge, sand, and seawater, impossible to excavate without massive technological capability. Megadroughts and hyperstorms climate is not static. It shifts abruptly, sometimes within a single generation. Megadroughts have turned fertile valleys into deserts. Massive storms have carved new coastlines. The Sahara itself was once green, dotted with lakes and thriving with human life. How many cultures rose and fell in that long-lost savanna? Firestorms and ozone collapse. Recent scientific research has suggested that solar activity, gamma-ray bursts, or supervolcanoes may periodically damage the Earth's ozone layer, exposing large regions to lethal ultraviolet radiation. Such events could scorch the land, kill crops, and force survivors into caves, mountains, or underground shelters. Was Derinkuyu built or inherited for such a crisis? We cannot say. But the hypothesis remains. Earth has erased its surface many times, and every erasure removes evidence not just of people, but of everything they created. This brings us to another factor, the fragility of material culture. Early civilizations did not build with steel or reinforced concrete. They built with wood, clay, and stone. Wood vanishes. Clay crumbles. Even stone weathers into dust over thousands of years. For a civilization to leave visible ruins after 20,000 years, it would need to carve into mountains or construct megaliths of almost incomprehensible scale. Göbekli Tepe survived because it was buried. Derinkuyu survived because it was underground. Stonehenge survived because its stones were enormous. But what about the cities of ancient coastlines? What about settlements made from mud brick, timber, or woven materials? These would vanish entirely, especially in humid or coastal environments. And so we confront the paradox. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, especially when the Earth itself acts as a destroyer. This perspective reframes everything. Civilization may have begun not once, but many times. Each rise separated by natural disasters, each cycle leaving behind only fragments, each new culture rediscovering what the previous one had mastered, perhaps remembering only myths or symbols of what came before. This cyclical view appears not just in geology, but in human myth-making. Nearly every ancient culture speaks of ages destroyed by fire, water, or darkness. These may be echoes of real cataclysms, refracted through storytelling across generations, memories that outlived the civilizations that carried them. But the greatest question remains. If Earth erased these early cultures, did anything manage to escape the destruction? Did any knowledge survive? Were any traditions or technologies passed down to the next age? In the next block, we will explore the possibility that some secrets did survive, carried by travelers, shamans, astronomers, or refugees who wandered into new lands and seeded the foundations of the civilizations we know today. If Earth erased these early cultures, did anything manage to escape the destruction? Did any knowledge survive? Were any traditions or technologies passed down to the next age? These questions echo through the ruins and myths of the ancient world like distant thunder, faint, persistent, and impossible to ignore. Because for every cataclysm, for every collapse, for every continent swallowed by rising seas or turned to dust by the shifting winds of climate, there were survivors. Humans endure. They adapt. They flee. They remember. But memory is fragile. Knowledge is even more so. And in the aftermath of global destruction, refugees rarely carry scrolls or libraries. They carry stories, symbols, rituals, ideas, seeds that can outlive cities, outlive temples, outlive entire civilizations. Seeds that can be planted in new soil centuries after the world they belong to has vanished. Could it be that the earliest civilizations, Egypt, Sumer, the Indus Valley, the Olmec, the Maya, were not the first to rise, but the first to rebuild, the first to reorganize the remnants of a world already lost, the first to translate ancient memories into new forms? This idea begins subtly, almost invisibly, but becomes clearer as we examine the pattern of origin stories across the world. Civilizations that begin fully formed. Egypt's earliest dynasties emerge with a sophistication that seems to have skipped generations of development. Hieroglyphs appear without crude prototypes. Architectural principles appear refined. The earliest known pharaohs are already steeped in cosmic symbolism, astronomical alignment, and complex funerary rites. In Sumer, writing arrives not as simple pictographs struggling toward meaning, but as a structured system capable of recording commerce, myths, mathematics, and astronomy. Their earliest ziggurats exhibit geometric precision. Their myths recall antediluvian kings, cities drowned, and eras long forgotten. The Indus Valley appears with standardized measurements. Their bricks follow fixed ratios. Their urban planning is orderly and consistent across vast distances. Their focus on hygiene, flowing water, and urban layout reflects a long cultural tradition. Yet we cannot find those earlier stages in the archaeological record. The Olmec, the mother culture of Mesoamerica, emerge with colossal heads, advanced iconography, and astronomical markers. But where did their monumental building techniques come from? Where are the simpler, earlier versions? It's as if these societies inherited a toolbox whose origins they themselves no longer understood. The strange memory of a before time. Many ancient cultures speak explicitly of a world that existed before the one we know, not metaphorically, literally, a world that ended in catastrophe. The Maya describe previous suns, cycles of creation and destruction. The Egyptians speak of Zep Tepi, the first time, an era when gods walked the earth and civilization began long before the pharaohs. The Sumerians list kings who ruled for tens of thousands of years before a great flood swept everything away. The Greeks tell of the age of Atlantis, a land of advanced knowledge lost beneath the sea. Indigenous peoples of the Americas remember deluges, fires, and migrations from drowned homelands. Why do stories on opposite sides of the world describe such similar patterns? Are these simply mythic archetypes, or do they preserve fragments of genuine events experienced by ancestors thousands of years earlier, the knowledge that should not exist? Some early cultures possessed knowledge that defies their supposed historical context. Precise celestial alignments appear in megalithic sites across Europe, Asia, and the Americas. Ancient texts record cycles of precession, an astronomical pattern requiring millennia of observation. Megalithic sites around the world align with solstices, equinoxes, lunar standstills, and even stellar rising points. Some traditions describe the Earth's shape, movement, and orientation long before astronomy should have been advanced enough to deduce such things. Did these cultures develop this knowledge independently? It is possible. But what if they inherited concepts from ancestors who lived along ancient coastlines now submerged? People who tracked the sky out of necessity, perhaps to anticipate catastrophic cycles or navigational patterns. The refugee hypothesis. Imagine a world at the end of the Ice Age. Sea levels rise rapidly, sometimes by more than a meter or two per century. Entire coasts vanish. Islands shrink. Peninsulas become archipelagos. What was once solid land becomes treacherous water. Millions of people living along ancient shorelines are displaced. They move inland, carrying memories, tools, stories, and whatever knowledge they can salvage. Some settle in river valleys. Others find refuge in caves, highlands, and mountains that remain dry. Over generations, these groups adapt to new environments. Their descendants forget the details of the world that drowned, but echoes persist. Rituals, symbols, calendar systems, astronomical lore. Those fragments eventually seed the earliest civilizations we know. The hidden lineage of megalith builders. One of the greatest hints of cultural inheritance lies in the global distribution of megalithic architecture. From Europe to India, from Japan to the Americas, enormous stone structures appear with striking similarities. Dolmens, standing stones, stone circles, calendar markers, star alignments. Is it possible that these builders were part of a widespread cultural continuum, a network of survivors who scattered across the world after the collapse of an earlier age? A diaspora, not of nations, but of knowledge keepers? Consider how myths often describe wandering sages, sky watchers, or civilizers who appear suddenly after a flood or fire, teaching agriculture, astronomy, architecture, and laws. Viracocha among the Andean peoples, Oans in Mesopotamia, Thoth in Egypt, Quetzalcoatl in Mesoamerica. Were these literal beings, symbolic archetypes, or cultural memories of real individuals, refugees from places we no longer know, carrying knowledge from lost homelands? Why the survivors couldn't rebuild everything? Even if pockets of knowledge survived, why didn't these survivors recreate the world they had lost? For one simple reason, rebuilding requires more than memory. It requires infrastructure, population size, tools, stability, and resources. After a global catastrophe, humanity would have been scattered, traumatized, and struggling for basic survival. It may have taken thousands of years before anyone had the means to rebuild cities, codify knowledge, or carve monuments. And by then, much of the old world's wisdom may have faded, surviving only as fragments encoded in myth. The mystery of sudden civilizational takeoff. This could explain why ancient civilizations appear suddenly in the archaeological record with advanced capabilities. They were not evolving from nothing. They were converging toward something remembered, something half-forgotten, a reemergence, not a beginning. But if this is true, it raises a profound question. What was the world like before the Great Forgetting? What kind of societies existed? How advanced were they? And what did they know that we do not? To answer this, we must dive deeper into the anomalies, those strange traces that suggest technologies, architectural methods, or scientific insights far ahead of their time. Because if forgotten civilizations left a legacy behind, their greatest secrets may still be buried in the stones, submerged under the seas, or encoded in myths waiting to be understood. If forgotten civilizations did leave a legacy behind, then their greatest secrets may still be buried in the stones, submerged beneath the oceans, or encoded in myths waiting to be understood. This is where the story takes its boldest turn, not toward certainty, but toward possibility. Because across the world, we encounter technologies and architectural feats that seem to emerge out of nowhere. Techniques so complex, so refined, and so anomalous for their time that they raise a chilling, exhilarating question. Were these innovations truly invented by the civilizations we attribute them to? Or were they inherited from cultures now completely erased? To answer this, we must examine the physical evidence, the stones, the alignments, the constructions that remain long after their builders are gone. And the deeper we look, the stranger the picture becomes. Stonework beyond explanation. Let us start with something tangible. Stone, massive stone, the kind that defies the technological limits of ancient societies as we understand them. Across the world, we find ruins built with blocks so large, so precise, and so perfectly fitted that even modern engineers struggle to explain them. In Egypt, the foundation stones of the Valley Temple and the Sphinx Precinct weigh between 50 and 200 tons each. Their surfaces are flat, their angles crisp, and their placement immaculate. They are remnants of a construction style far older than the pyramids themselves, suggesting an earlier, more advanced architectural tradition. In Bolivia, at Pumapunku, stones lie scattered like the remnants of a shattered machine. Polished granite blocks cut with perfect right angles, interlocking shapes, and drill holes so precise they appear machined. But Pumapunku predates the Inca by thousands of years, and the tools required for such refinement do not appear in the archaeological record. In Lebanon, stones within the base of the Baalbek complex weigh hundreds of tons, the largest known man-moved stones in history. Yet the cultures associated with the site offer no clear explanation for how or why these blocks were transported. These are not isolated anomalies. They form a global pattern of stone manipulation at colossal scales, often appearing at the very earliest phases of a civilization's architectural history. Why does technology peak first? Why do the oldest ruins often appear to be the most advanced? Could these be remnants of knowledge inherited from an earlier age? Astronomical precision across the ancient world. Then there are the stars. Ancient cultures tracked solstices, equinoxes, lunar cycles, and stellar movements with accuracy so advanced that modern astronomers remain impressed. Structures built thousands of years before written history align perfectly with celestial events. Newgrange in Ireland illuminates its inner chamber with sunlight only at winter solstice. Stonehenge marks the midsummer sunrise. The Nabta Playa Circle in Egypt predates the pyramids by thousands of years and tracks both solar and stellar cycles. Göbekli Tepe may encode constellations associated with seasonal migrations and cosmic cycles. The Maya tracked Venus with precision unmatched until modern telescopes. But astronomy requires long-term observation, generations of data, centuries of refinement. How did early cultures acquire such precise knowledge so quickly? Were they inheriting astronomical traditions preserved by survivors from an earlier age? People who had watched the heavens for reasons tied to survival, navigation, or anticipation of catastrophe. Engineering principles. Without evolution, civilizations typically show developmental progression, simple structures evolving into complex ones. But in many ancient cultures, the pattern is reversed. The earliest Egyptian pyramids are the most precisely aligned. The earliest Sumerian ziggurats show the most consistent mathematical ratios. The earliest Indus Valley cities exhibit the most advanced sewage systems. The earliest Olmec monuments display the finest craftsmanship. The earliest Andean civilizations demonstrate the most precise stonework. Why is the beginning always more advanced than the middle? This reverse evolution is one of the strongest indicators that ancient cultures were drawing from pre-existing knowledge whose origin is now lost to history. The puzzle of forgotten science. Ancient myths often reference knowledge that sounds scientific, sometimes uncannily so. Indian texts describe cycles of destruction and creation that mirror modern cosmology. Egyptian symbols encode astronomical alignments and geodesic principles. Sumerian tablets catalog celestial bodies invisible without telescopes. Mesoamerican codices calculate astronomical cycles with mathematical sophistication. Were these coincidences, symbolic metaphors, or remnants of scientific understanding preserved through ritual and myth? Imagine a society recovering from catastrophe. Its people remember fragments of their ancestors' knowledge, but lack the means to test or apply them fully. Over generations, scientific ideas become mythic imagery, encoded in stories of gods, heroes, and cosmic cycles, but the core survives, like a fossil of forgotten science. Impossible artifacts? Or misplaced clues? Then there are objects that do not fit in their own timeline. Artifacts that spark controversy and speculation. Carved stones dated far older than expected. Unusual metal alloys found in ancient contexts. Maps showing pre-glacial coastlines. Tools that imply advanced geometry or surveying techniques. Most of these artifacts are dismissed as misinterpretations, errors in dating, or coincidences. And perhaps some are. But when anomalies appear across continents and across eras, the dismissal begins to feel inadequate. If a single artifact misaligns with the timeline, we can ignore it. If dozens do, scattered around the world, emerging from unrelated cultures, perhaps we must reconsider the framework, not the artifacts. Legacies, hidden in plain sight. Sometimes the legacy of a vanished civilization might not be physical at all. It may be methodological, a way of thinking. Consider the global emphasis on sacred geometry, the use of specific mathematical ratios, such as 1.2 or 1.f, in early temples, the recurrence of the same numbers in calendars worldwide, 260, 365, 432, 12, 72, the symbolic emphasis on celestial cycles in mythologies across continents. Did all these cultures independently converge on the same mathematical and cosmological systems? It is possible, but it is also possible they were drawing from a shared ancestral source, a blueprint inherited unconsciously, carried in stories, symbols, and traditions. The echo of lost engineering. Perhaps the most compelling evidence of inherited knowledge lies in the consistent appearance of advanced water engineering across early civilizations. Roman aqueducts? Impressive, yes, but before them, the Indus Valley engineered citywide sewage systems thousands of years earlier. Before them, ancient Egyptian sites show complex water channeling structures. And before them still, Göbekli Tepe has drainage channels carved into its stone floors. Did early humans independently invent advanced hydrology in multiple regions, or were they remembering patterns used by distant ancestors who built cities along coastlines now submerged? The missing step. For every ancient innovation, we search for the developmental stages that should exist. But again and again, we find the same problem. There is no earlier prototype, no crude precursor, no experimental phase, no clumsy attempts. The technology arrives whole, complete, mature. And when innovation appears without evolution, we must consider an alternative, inheritance. But if the world truly inherited knowledge from earlier civilizations, then the next question becomes unavoidable. What were those earliest civilizations like? How advanced were they? And what force finally silenced them? To explore this mystery, we must now step deeper into prehistory than ever before, into a time before the Ice Age ended, before our coastlines existed, before our world looked anything like the one we know. If knowledge was inherited, then we must now confront the next great unknown. What kind of civilizations existed before the world we recognize? What cultures lived before the Ice Age melted, before the seas rose, before the continents settled into their current forms? To answer this, we must cross a boundary, one few historians dare to approach, because the moment we step beyond the last 12,000 years, the archaeological landscape becomes sparse, fragmented, and ambiguous. The deeper we dig into time, the more the Earth resists our investigation. It is as if prehistory is protected by the planet itself, a locked chamber with missing walls and floors, a story told only through hints and whispers. Yet even in the darkness of deep time, signs emerge, subtle at first, then clearer, patterns too consistent to ignore. They paint a picture not of a barren prehistoric world, but of a complex, dynamic, heavily populated planet with cultures that rose, fell, and left barely a trace behind. The pre-Ice Age world was not empty. Modern reconstructions of prehistoric maps reveal landscapes that no longer exist. The Persian Gulf was a vast, fertile basin fed by rivers. The Sunda Shelf was a supercontinent connecting Southeast Asia. The Bering landmass stretched like a grassy bridge between Asia and the Americas. The North Sea was a wide valley, Doggerland, lush with forests, lakes, and human activity. These were not small, isolated regions. They were enormous, thriving ecosystems with stable climates, perfect for human culture, perfect for settlement, perfect for civilization, and yet all of them are now gone, swallowed by oceans or reshaped beyond recognition. If early civilizations existed, this is where they would have lived, on the coasts, in fertile plains, along river deltas that no longer exist. And that means their ruins are not on land. They are underwater. The ocean as a tomb of cities. If archaeologists today could drain the oceans, the world we know would be unrecognizable. Coastal shelves would expose vast territories that have been hidden for thousands of years. On those drowned landscapes, we might find ancient ports, lost cities, vast networks of settlements, roads and canals, megalithic structures, artifacts undisturbed for millennia, but the ocean prevents us from seeing what lies beneath. Its pressure crushes, its sediment buries, its currents erode. It is the perfect destroyer of human memory. When people ask, where is the evidence of early civilizations? The answer may simply be, under 300 feet of water. This, more than anything, explains the silences of prehistory. The great compression of time archaeology is not lacking evidence. It is lacking context. Consider this. Homo sapiens have existed for at least 300,000 years, yet we only have dense archaeological evidence for the last 10,000. That means more than 95% of human history is practically invisible. Why? Because ice sheets erased entire continents. Rising seas drowned coastlines. Wind buried settlements in dunes. Rivers changed course, burying cities beneath mud. Earthquakes destroyed entire regions. Vegetation overtook ruins until nothing remained. Erosion removed all traces of early humanity's presence. And where ruins still exist, they may lie beneath hundreds of feet of geological layers. We are not missing centuries. We are missing entire eras. The people before us were not primitive. Traditional history paints early humans as simple, survival-focused hunter-gatherers with limited tools and few skills. But this stereotype collapses under scrutiny. These people migrated across continents, navigated oceans, understood seasonal patterns, used pigments, beads, and art, carved symbols, buried their dead with ritual, created music, built complex structures, possibly developed early navigation and astronomy. In other words, they were people, fully capable of innovation, cooperation, and culture. The idea that sophisticated societies could not have existed before 10,000 BCE is based not on evidence, but on absence. And absence is exactly what we should expect after global cataclysms. The puzzle of megafaunal extinction. Toward the end of the Ice Age, something extraordinary happened. Nearly all large animals across multiple continents went extinct in a short geological window. Mammoths, giant sloths, cave lions, saber-tooths, gone. Climate change alone cannot fully explain it. Human hunting alone cannot fully explain it. This extinction coincides suspiciously with climatic upheaval, sea level rise, massive fires, abrupt temperature shifts, glacial collapse, possible cosmic impacts. If an advanced human culture existed at that time, it too would have been caught in the destruction, not selectively spared. Civilization itself may have been collateral damage. Atlantean echoes everywhere. Now the myths begin to make sense. Atlantis drowned in a single day and night. Lemuria sank into the ocean. Flood myths describe continents disappearing. Sumerian texts speak of cities washed away by the Great Deluge. The Maya describe worlds destroyed by water. Australian Aboriginal stories recall land swallowed by rising seas. stories confirmed by modern geology. Were these mere allegories, or ancient memories of real events, cataclysms witnessed by early humans and passed down for millennia? The possibility is no longer fringe. It is logical, the silence of the stone. If ancient civilizations existed, why don't we find their steel tools, their metal machines, their monumental architecture? Because stone is the only medium that survives deep time. Everything else vanishes. Entire Bronze Age kingdoms disappeared without leaving bronze behind. Wood disintegrates within centuries. Metals corrode to dust. Only the largest stones remain, and even those must be enormous to survive thousands of years of erosion, which is why Göbekli Tepe, Derinkuyu, and Pumapunku matter so much. They are anomalies. They should not exist, yet they do. They are the peaks of mountains whose bases lie underwater, the forgotten architects of prehistory, who built the earliest megaliths, who aligned stones with the solstices, who carved symbols that resemble constellations, who tracked lunar cycles for thousands of years. These questions challenge the conventional timeline, but they also lead to a deeper, more profound idea. Perhaps the earliest humans were not primitive. Perhaps they were the survivors of a world we cannot see. Their descendants built Göbekli Tepe as a memory. Their descendants dug Derinkuyu as protection. Their descendants encoded astronomy into myth. Their descendants rebuilt civilization in new lands, and the rest was forgotten. If this is true, then we must now confront a startling possibility. Human civilization may not be 6,000 years old. It may be tens of thousands of years older, and that revelation forces us to ask the most important question of all. What truly happened to those first civilizations? What force ended their world so completely that only fragments remain? In the next block, we descend into the heart of disappearance itself, into the cataclysms, wars, migrations, and mysteries that could erase an entire global civilization without leaving a trace. If human civilization may be tens of thousands of years older than we believe, then the next question becomes unavoidable. What truly happened to those first civilizations? What force ended their world so completely that only fragments remain? To answer this, we must step into the most dangerous terrain of all, the boundary between prehistory and oblivion. Because here, in this twilight zone of memory and geology, we encounter events so catastrophic, so sweeping, that they could erase entire cultures as if they had never existed. It is tempting to imagine a single disaster, a great flood, a cosmic impact, a supervolcano, a shifting pole. But the more closely we examine the evidence, the clearer it becomes that the ancient world did not end in one catastrophe. It ended in many, a sequence of global shocks, each capable of destroying societies. But together they could wipe out every trace of an earlier human age, the cascading collapse. Let us begin at the end of the last ice age, a time of unimaginable instability. Between 20,000 and 8,000 BCE, the Earth experienced meltwater pulses raising sea levels hundreds of feet, abrupt climate reversals, floods on continental scales, shifting monsoon patterns, hypercanes, storms more powerful than modern hurricanes, widespread fires recorded in charcoal layers worldwide, ecosystem collapse, mass extinction of megafauna, potential meteor airbursts and comet fragments, volcanic eruptions beneath ice sheets, earthquakes triggered by glacial rebound. This was not a gentle warming. It was a violent and chaotic transition, a planetary convulsion. If civilizations existed before this transition, even modest ones, they would have faced destruction on every front. The Earth itself was in upheaval. The mysterious meltwater pulses. Sea level rise was not steady. It came in explosive bursts known as meltwater pulse 1A and 1B, events when oceans rose dozens of feet in a matter of centuries, possibly even faster. Imagine entire continents shrinking. Imagine river valleys filling with seawater. Imagine coastal cities swallowed almost overnight. If settlements lined ancient coasts, and they almost certainly did, their destruction would have been total. Not even foundations would remain. All evidence of culture gone in silence. The Younger Dryas shock. Around 12,800 years ago, the world was warming, then suddenly plunged back into near-glacial conditions. Temperatures dropped, fires raged, megafauna died, human populations crashed. What caused this? Some scientists argue for a fragmented comet striking the North American ice sheet, triggering massive meltwater, wildfires, and atmospheric disruption. Others propose volcanic pulses or ocean circulation collapse. Whatever the cause, it was catastrophic. Firestorms burned millions of square miles. Smoke darkened the sky. Food chains collapsed. Coastal lands drowned. Human survivors scattered in all directions. This event alone could destroy a civilization, but it wasn't the end. The final warming 200 years later, another abrupt shift. The Younger Dryas ended, temperatures surged, ice sheets melted at astonishing speed, and the oceans rose once again. This second collapse would erase anything the first disaster missed. If early civilizations had existed, they would have been doubly destroyed, first by fire and cold, then by heat and water. Their cities would have cracked, burned, frozen, flooded, and finally drowned. Nothing human-made could survive such a sequence intact. Fire from the sky, airbursts, and impacts. Ancient stories often describe fire falling from heaven, stars exploding, or serpents of fire. These could be mythic metaphors, but they mirror real phenomena. Airburst explosions from meteors can release energy equivalent to nuclear weapons. The Tunguska event in 1908 flattened 800 square miles of forest in seconds. Now imagine such an event striking an inhabited region during prehistory. If a large airburst occurred over an ancient civilization, it would leave almost no trace today, only a thin geological scar. Could this explain why some cultures speak of the world burning from above? Could it explain sudden fire layers found across continents, dating to the end of the Ice Age? The drownings of the Earth. After the ice collapsed, the oceans surged inland. Ancient coastlines flooded. Lowlands filled with water. Doggerland vanished. The Persian Gulf Basin became a sea. The Sunda Shelf drowned beneath rising tides. Entire civilizations could have been erased without a trace. Imagine, temples swallowed by tides, villages buried under mud, ports consumed by waves, knowledge scattered among refugees. If survivors fled inland, they carried memories, not artifacts, stories of floods, stories of lost lands, stories of cities swallowed by the sea. These became myths, but perhaps they were memories. The forgotten wars now consider another possibility. What if not all ancient destruction was natural? Imagine a world strained by disaster, scarcity, and migration. Resources shrinking, populations displaced, culturally distinct groups forced into conflict. In such conditions, war is inevitable. But ancient wars would leave almost no trace after 10,000 years. Wood, leather, fiber, stone, these decay rapidly, bodies decompose, metal rusts. Only large-scale fortifications or monumental ruins could survive, and if early civilizations used materials that do not preserve well, we would never know they existed. The silence of the archaeological record archaeology is not failing to find evidence. The evidence is simply not where we are looking. The entire pre-Ice Age world is missing, not metaphorically, literally. It lies underwater. It lies beneath layers of sediment. It lies beneath deserts that used to be rivers. It lies beneath forests, lakes, and shifting tectonic plates. To expect visible ruins from 20,000 years ago is unrealistic. To dismiss early civilizations because no ruins survived is naive. Even modern cities would vanish after the same period. The worldwide memory of a lost age. Now, the myths begin to align. Atlantis destroyed in one night. Zep Tepi before the flood. Sumerian kings before the deluge. Andean stories of a time before the sun changed. Polynesian legends of islands swallowed by the sea. Australian Aboriginal accounts of coastlines shifting dramatically. Biblical, Mesopotamian, Hindu, and Native American flood epics. These are not isolated stories. They form a global pattern. They are memories, echoes of a time when the world truly did end. The human aftermath. What does the world look like after cataclysm? It looks like this: scattered tribes, fragments of knowledge, oral traditions, sky watching out of fear, rituals to remember the old world, communities rebuilding from nothing. This is the world into which agriculture emerged. This is the world into which Göbekli Tepe was built. This is the world into which Çatalhöyük appeared. This is the world into which Sumer, Egypt, and the Indus Valley eventually rose. Not from nothing, but from the ashes of something older. A world rebuilt by survivors. A world of inherited fragments. A world marked by cycles. And now we must ask, if Earth has destroyed civilizations before, could it do so again? Are we living at the top of another cycle? To explore that chilling possibility and the implications it holds for our own age, we continue forward. If Earth has destroyed civilizations before, could it do so again? Are we living at the top of another cycle? This question may feel unsettling, even frightening, but it is the logical continuation of everything we've uncovered so far. Because if humanity's story is not a straight ascent from simplicity to complexity, but a repeating cycle of rise and collapse, then we must consider the possibility that we are simply the latest iteration, not the culmination. And more importantly, we may be repeating patterns older than memory itself. To explore this, we must abandon the idea of civilization as a one-time miracle. Instead, we must imagine it as a rhythm, a heartbeat, echoing through prehistory, the forgotten pattern of human cycles. Across the ancient world, myths speak of ages, plural, not a single age of humanity, but multiple epochs, each destroyed and rebuilt. The Greeks described the golden, silver, bronze, and iron ages. The Maya envisioned cycles of suns, each destroyed by different forces. The Hindus speak of yugas, vast cycles of rise and decline. The Egyptians wrote of epochs before kings, before dynasties, before the first time. The Hopi remember worlds destroyed by fire and water. The Japanese Kojiki references earlier cosmic ages long before recorded history. Why do so many ancient cultures describe civilization as cyclical rather than linear? Why do they insist that worlds existed before ours and ended? These parallels suggest something profound. Ancient peoples may have remembered echoes of real cycles, memories passed down through oral tradition long after their origin had faded into myth. The archaeological footprint of cycles would explain why we see sudden rises in culture, advanced architecture appearing abruptly, mathematics arriving fully formed, astronomical systems already refined, megalithic engineering without prototypes, symbolic languages emerging complete, early cities showing planning sophistication. It isn't that these civilizations invented everything from scratch, it's that they rebuilt from whatever fragments survived the previous collapse. This explains something striking: why the earliest layers of civilizations like Egypt, Sumer, and the Indus Valley are often the most advanced. Cycles naturally produce this effect. Early phases inherit old knowledge. Middle phases lose clarity. Late phases innovate again, but often lose the original blueprint. Göbekli Tepe, a monument to memory. Göbekli Tepe becomes a perfect symbol of a cyclical world, built just after a global cataclysm, created by people transitioning from catastrophe to recovery, filled with animal symbols reminiscent of older forgotten worlds, intentionally buried, as if preserving a sacred memory, standing at the crossroads between an age that ended and an age that began. Perhaps it was not the beginning of civilization. Perhaps it was the first attempt to remember, Derinkuyu, a blueprint for survival. The underground cities of Cappadocia also fit the pattern well. Their depth, engineering, and ventilation systems suggest that the builders were not experimenting. They were following a template. A template from where? From whom? From what kind of threat? Could Derinkuyu represent knowledge inherited from an age when surface life became impossible, whether from climate disaster, cosmic radiation, volcanic winter, or something else entirely? In a cyclical framework, Derinkuyu is not mysterious. It is logical, a memory of survival written beneath the earth. The ghost cities beneath the sea, coastal ruins found underwater, may be remnants of the previous cycle. Towns or proto-cities drowned by rising seas at the end of the Ice Age. If humanity had developed significant settlements during the pre-glacial period, they would all be underwater today. This is not speculation, it is geological fact. More than 10 million square kilometers of land were drowned after 11,000 BCE. That is an area larger than the United States. If civilizations existed there, they were erased completely. What remains on land are only the edges, the highland remnants, the mountaintop shrines, the inland refuges. Why we forgot. If humanity lived through cycles of creation and destruction, why do we not remember clearly? The answer is devastatingly simple. Trauma erases, desperation rewrites, survival narrows focus, memory distorts, time dissolves everything. Imagine a global collapse happening today. Imagine billions of people displaced, infrastructure destroyed, technology forgotten, cities submerged. Within a few generations, stories of skyscrapers might be told as myths. Machines might become legends. Science could fade into superstition. Anything preserved would be scattered across the world, misunderstood by tribes rebuilding from nothing. Now imagine that not once, but many times. Is it so hard to believe ancient humans rebuilt after similar resets? The archaeological blind spot. Modern science is biased toward what survives, not what existed. Our entire understanding of prehistory is based on surviving artifacts, but the deeper into time we go, the more selective survival becomes. Stone survives. Bones sometimes survive. Ceramics survive. Massive architecture may survive. Everything else disappears. If a prehistoric civilization used wood, fiber, or light metals, we would never know it existed. If it built on coastlines, we would never see its ruins. If it stored knowledge on organic material, it would be lost forever. The archaeological record is not a book. It is a tiny sampling of pages that happen to avoid fire, water, and time. The mysterious 1%. Here's the most profound realization. We have only discovered a fraction of the ancient world. Experts estimate that less than 1% of ancient sites have been excavated, and many more remain unknown. Dense jungles, deep oceans, shifting deserts, and inaccessible mountain ranges hide secrets we have never touched. If a single discovery like Göbekli Tepe can rewrite history, what could thousands of unknown sites tell us? What would we learn if we could see beneath the waves? What would we find if we scanned every desert, every mountain, every valley? What the next cycle might reveal. If humanity is living at the peak of another cycle, then our greatest responsibility is to understand the past so we can avoid repeating its mistakes. But we cannot do that while clinging to a linear narrative that refuses to acknowledge the possibility of deep history, real, complex, cyclical history. And so we return to the fundamental question: what forces drive these cycles? What resets civilization? What shapes the rise and fall of worlds? To answer that, we must return to the Earth itself, its climate, its orbit, its geology, its cosmos, and examine the hidden rhythms that govern long-term human survival. In the next block, we explore the mechanisms behind civilization cycles, the forces that destroy worlds, and the patterns they leave behind. To understand why civilizations rise and fall in cycles, we must look beyond human behavior, beyond wars, beyond migrations, beyond the internal logic of culture, and into something far larger, far older, and far more relentless. The Earth has rhythms, the cosmos has rhythms, and civilization is caught between them. Ancient people knew this intuitively. They watched the sky. They observed the land. They built monuments that aligned with the turning of the heavens. They saw cycles everywhere, in seasons, in tides, in the movement of stars, in the growth of crops, in the warming and cooling of the world. Modern science has confirmed what ancient cultures sensed. Our planet moves not through a straight, stable timeline, but through repeating oscillations. And these oscillations are powerful enough to shape history, sometimes subtly, sometimes catastrophically. If earlier civilizations lived through these rhythms, they would have experienced cycles of creation and destruction far more dramatic than the ones recorded in written history. Let us explore these rhythms now. The cosmic clockwork. The Earth's orbit is not fixed. It shifts in patterns known as Milankovitch cycles, subtle changes in eccentricity, shape of orbit, axial tilt, angle of Earth's spin, precession, wobble of the axis. Individually, these shifts seem small, but together they determine the intensity of seasons, the expansion and retreat of ice ages, global climate patterns, sea levels, rainfall cycles, continental humidity. Every 100,000 years, the Earth experiences a full glacial cycle. Every 26,000 years, the axis completes a precessional wobble. Every 41,000 years, axial tilt changes influence global climate. These cycles are slow, immense forces, but they do something extraordinary. They create natural epochs, warm periods, cold periods, flood periods, drought periods. If an ancient civilization rose during a stable warm phase, it might flourish for thousands of years. But when the cycle turned, when the climate shifted abruptly, that civilization might collapse, fragment, or vanish entirely. Solar variability. The sun as destroyer and creator. Humanity forgets that the sun is not stable. It changes, it pulses, it flares. Solar cycles occur every 11 years, but larger cycles, 60-year, 200-year, 2,300-year, even 6,000-year cycles, produce dramatic effects. Megadroughts, megastorms, crop failures, auroras that reach the equator, temperature shifts, ionization bursts, atmospheric disturbances. Powerful solar flares can collapse global electrical grids today. But what would these cosmic events have done to prehistoric cultures, especially those dependent on agriculture? Or worse, what if the sun once produced super flares, massive bursts of radiation recorded in tree rings, capable of injuring life on Earth? Some underground complexes, like Derinkuyu, might represent cultural memory of such events. Their existence becomes less mysterious if we imagine a world where skies once turned hostile. The Great Ocean Pulse. The oceans themselves move in cycles. The Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, AMOC, shifts every few thousand years. When AMOC slows, Europe freezes. When it accelerates, monsoons change. When it collapses, global climate is thrown into chaos. The Younger Dryas cooling event appears to be linked to an oceanic pulse. An ancient civilization living during such an abrupt collapse would face food shortages, failed crops, migration, and social breakdown, conditions ripe for total disappearance. Megadroughts and green Saharas. Most people imagine Earth's deserts as eternal, but deserts shift in and out of existence. The Sahara itself has undergone dramatic transformations. Between 12,000 and 5,000 BCE, it was lush and green. Lakes dotted the landscape. Massive river systems ran across it. People thrived in large communities. Animals, now extinct, roamed freely. When monsoons shifted, the Sahara dried rapidly. The people who lived there scattered. Some moved into the Nile Valley, others moved into North Africa, others into the Levant, some perhaps toward Europe. If they carried remnants of earlier cultures, these migrations could explain the sudden rise of Egyptian, Mesopotamian, and Levantine societies. Climate rhythm becomes cultural transformation, the geological strokes of fate. The Earth is not a calm planet. Beneath our feet lies a mantle of molten rock, convection currents and tectonic plates in constant motion. Over thousands of years, earthquakes reshape continents. Volcanoes erupt unexpectedly. Islands emerge and sink. Mountains rise and erode. Coastlines transform. Tsunamis wipe out entire regions. These geological forces operate slowly until they don't. A single volcanic super-eruption could wipe out a civilization. Toba nearly did. If early civilizations lived near volcanic zones, highly likely given the fertility of such areas, they would have been wiped out repeatedly. The cometary window. Every 12,000, 13,000 years, Earth may pass through a dense region of cosmic debris from a fragmented comet. This idea is controversial, but increasingly researched. Around 12,800 years ago, at the onset of the Younger Dryas, something triggered global firestorms, temperature collapse, and widespread destruction. Some scientists argue this was caused by comet fragments, airburst explosions, a meteor shower impacting ice sheets, cosmic dust blocking sunlight. If such impacts recur cyclically, they could explain myths of fire from the sky, burning oceans, dragons or serpents falling from the heavens, stars exploding, gods punishing humanity. These are not fantasies. They may be memories. The fatal alignment of cycles. What if the first civilizations did not fall from a single cause, but from a convergence? Imagine a moment when the climate shifts abruptly, sea levels rise quickly, solar activity peaks, ocean circulation collapses, comet fragments strike the atmosphere, megadroughts spread, volcanic eruptions darken skies, ecosystems fail, a perfect storm, a planetary reset. Is it any wonder that entire continents, Doggerland, the Persian Gulf Basin, Sundaland, vanished beneath water, that megafauna went extinct, that human populations shrank, that myths of global cataclysms appear everywhere? Is it any wonder we find no ruins older than 12,000 years? Not because none existed, but because the earth erased them. Ancient people knew the cycle. Here lies one of the most compelling clues of all. Ancient cultures were obsessed with cycles, not just seasonal cycles, but cosmic ones. The Maya tracked long cycles of destruction. The Vedas describe cyclical ages. Egyptian priests spoke of previous worlds. Plato wrote of periodic global resets. Native Americans speak of rising and falling worlds. Chinese mythology references cyclical floods and fires. Aboriginal Australian myths mark ancient sea level rise with frightening precision. These cultures were not ignorant. They were remembering. Something had happened before, something devastating enough to scar humanity's collective memory. The pattern emerges. When we put all these elements together, a chilling but elegant pattern forms. 1. Civilizations rise in stable climatic windows. 2. Knowledge accumulates. 3. Populations grow and spread. 4. Cataclysms strike. Sometimes natural, sometimes compounded. 5. Civilizations collapse. 6. Survivors scatter, carrying fragments of knowledge. 7. New civilizations emerge, mistaking themselves for the first. 8. Myths become the only surviving memory of the previous age. 9. The cycle begins again. We may not be the first. We may only be the latest. And if the rhythm continues, if the cycle repeats, then we must ask the question ancient people feared most. When will the next reset come? And what signs would warn us? In the next block, we dive into the mysteries that hint at a possible pattern, markers that ancient people may have recognized, and which might help us understand where we stand in the cycle today. If civilization rises and falls in cycles, and if ancient peoples knew these cycles intimately, then the question becomes unavoidable. Did they leave warnings for us? Messages, encoded in stone, myth, mathematics, or the heavens, meant for a future age that would inevitably face the same dangers they once endured. This idea might sound dramatic, even mythic. But what if myth and drama are simply the last surviving forms of scientific knowledge, distorted by thousands of years of forgetting? As we dig deeper, a haunting possibility emerges. Ancient cultures may have attempted to warn the future about the cycle of destruction. They may have encoded their memories in ways that could survive the collapse of language, the drowning of continents, and the fading of entire civilizations. Let us explore these warnings now. The sky as a warning system. system. If cataclysms occurred on a predictable long-term cycle, the stars themselves would be the most reliable clock. Stone decays, metal corrodes, but the sky endures, and ancient cultures around the world aligned their monuments with celestial patterns. Stonehenge, Göbekli Tepe, Nabta Playa, Chichen Itza, Teotihuacan, Angkor, the Great Pyramid, the Medicine Wheel, Easter Island's Moai alignments. These massive structures were not just temples. They were observatories designed to track solstices, equinoxes, lunar standstills, planetary cycles, and precession. Why such obsession with celestial precision? Perhaps because the sky held clues. Perhaps the heavens were not a calendar for crop rotation, but for catastrophe rotation. The secret of precession. One of the most important astronomical cycles is the precession of the equinoxes, a slow wobble of Earth's axis that takes roughly 26,000 years to complete. Ancient cultures seem to have known about precession. The Egyptians encoded it in the myth of the phoenix. The Sumerians hinted at it in their celestial lists. The Maya tracked long counts approaching precessional lengths. The Greeks learned of it from older sources. The megalith builders of Europe appear to have monitored star shifts over centuries. But why would precession matter to ancient people? Because if cataclysms occur on cycles related to Earth's orientation, possibly due to comet debris streams, solar activity, climatic oscillations, gravitational interactions, then tracking precession would be a way to anticipate the next reset. Precession becomes a cosmic warning clock, a memory of destruction encoded in the movement of the stars. The Great Pyramid, a message for the future. The Great Pyramid of Giza is one of the most anomalous structures on Earth. Aligned to true north with incredible precision, proportions that encode P and F, shafts pointing toward specific constellations, foundation aligned to cardinal directions, dimensions correlated to Earth's radius, circumference, and precession cycle. Egyptologists say these are coincidences, but coincidences layered upon coincidences become patterns. What if the pyramid's design is not merely funerary or symbolic, but informational? A monument built to survive cataclysm, a message in universal language, geometry, astronomy, proportion. If an earlier civilization left knowledge behind, this is exactly how they would preserve it. In stone so massive it survives the grinding cycles of time. Göbekli Tepe as a stellar code. Some researchers propose that the pillars at Göbekli Tepe represent constellations and record astronomical events around 10,000 BCE, including the very catastrophes that ended the Ice Age world. Certain animal symbols correlate with star groups. Certain pillars appear to map seasonal positions. One panel may depict a cometary event. These interpretations remain debated, but they fit a broader pattern. Ancient people used the sky not just for timekeeping, but for remembering, for warning. Göbekli Tepe, intentionally buried, may have been sealed to preserve knowledge for an age far in the future, an age like ours. The flood myth, as a memory device. Flood myths are not simply stories. They are warnings disguised as narrative. Their purpose? To embed memory in culture, to preserve it across generations, to ensure it survives even when writing fails, to carry messages through millennia. Nearly every culture's flood story includes a world-ending deluge, survivors chosen or prepared, a vessel or refuge, a new beginning, a reminder to future generations. Why such consistency? Because catastrophic floods repeatedly shaped human prehistory. Myths become libraries, stories become data storage, narratives become memory codes. Architectural alignment as a signal. We find the same symbolic patterns across ancient structures, repeating ratios, cardinal alignments, solstice markers, astronomical sight lines, numerical codexes, geometric codes. These are not random. They are part of a communication system that transcends language. Ancient minds preserved their warnings not in parchment, but in stone and light. Every solstice alignment is a reminder. Watch the sky. Every sacred number is a clue. Cycles repeat. Every flood myth is a message. This happened before. underground refuges, a message of fear. Derinkuyu is not just a marvel of engineering, it is a warning. People do not carve 11 stories into volcanic rock unless something drove them underground, something terrified them, something threatened the surface world, something made them believe it would happen again. Imagine a culture that survived a cosmic event, solar radiation, firestorms, or ash-choked skies. Imagine their descendants believing such events were cyclical. Would they not build refuges? Would they not teach future generations to expect the cycle? Even the simple act of building underground is a message. We hid from the sky. You may have to hide again. The numerical code of destruction. Many ancient cultures preserve strange numbers. 72, 108, 216, 432, 2,160, 25,020. These numbers repeatedly appear in sacred texts, myths, architecture, calendars, rituals. They correlate with precessional cycles and astronomical rhythms. To ancient people, these numbers may have represented the timing of destruction, the countdown to the next cycle, cosmic clocks governing human existence. What if the ancients left behind not warnings in words, but warnings in mathematics? The last survivors as teachers. Nearly every early civilization speaks of mysterious visitors or culture bringers: Thoth, Osiris, Oannes, Quetzalcoatl, Viracocha, Wandjina, the Seven Sages, the Apkallu. These figures arrive after global catastrophe. They teach agriculture, architecture, astronomy, laws, writing myth, possibly. But what if these gods were simply survivors of older cultures, refugees carrying fragments of lost knowledge? Their teachings become warnings encoded in myth, the stone testament of humanity. When we view ancient structures not as temples or tombs, but as recording devices, their purpose becomes clear: to preserve knowledge through cycles, to encode cosmic rhythms, to mark dangerous ages, to warn future civilizations. Our ancestors may not have forgotten the past. They may have fought desperately to preserve it, knowing that we would need the message. Which brings us to a chilling question. Are we listening, or are we ignoring the very warnings meant to protect us? Because if the cycles are real, and if ancient civilizations knew how to read the cosmic clock, then the next reset may not be far away. In the next block, we explore what these warnings may be telling us, and where we stand in the cycle today. If ancient civilizations truly left warnings encoded in stone, myth, mathematics, and sky, then the next step is the most unsettling of all. Are we approaching the next turning point in the cycle? And if so, what signs would tell us? To answer this, we must overlay the ancient warnings with modern science, compare myth with measurement, and look at the patterns that shaped the ancient world. Patterns that may now be repeating. This is not prophecy. This is not alarmism. This is the simple recognition that if the earth moves in cycles, and if human civilization rises and falls with them, then we are not exempt. We are a chapter, not the whole book. And the book's structure is older than humanity itself, the great geophysical mirror. When we examine modern environmental data, we find unsettling parallels with ancient transitions. Rapid climate shifts, rising sea levels, intensifying storms, melting polar ice, shifting ocean currents, global droughts, abrupt changes in rainfall, mass migrations, ecological strain. None of these phenomena are new. All of them occurred during the late Ice Age. All of them occurred during previous warm to cold or cold to warm transitions. If the Earth is entering another transition phase, triggered by natural cycles, human activity, or both, the conditions resemble those that erased earlier civilizations. But the past shows us something more alarming. Civilizations collapse, not because of one catastrophe, but because multiple stressors converge. Just like the end of the Bronze Age, just like the Younger Dryas, just like the sudden flooding of Doggerland. Cycles do not destroy slowly, they tip, they cascade, they multiply. The world changes too fast for societies to adapt. and we, like our predecessors, may be caught in the turning of the wheel, the return of the sky clock. If the ancients tracked precession and other astronomical cycles to anticipate dangerous eras, where are we right now in that cosmic rhythm? Earth's axial wobble is nearing the midpoint between major precessional markers. Ancient cultures regarded such transitional periods as unstable, times when the world might undergo upheaval. The number 2160, a precessional age, appears repeatedly in ancient myths as a fractal of larger cycles. Some believe that each age ends with disruption before a new dawn begins. Are we in such an era now? We cannot say with certainty, but the recurrence of these numbers in ancient traditions suggests they believed so. And if they encoded these numbers as warnings, not metaphors, then we may be approaching a turning of the great celestial wheel, the possibility of cosmic danger. Modern astronomy shows that Earth periodically passes through regions of increased cosmic debris, streams of dust and rock left behind by long-dead comets. Some scientists speculate that the Younger Dryas firestorm began when Earth passed through such a dense region. If this cycle repeats every 12,000, 13,000 years, then we might be nearer to the next crossing than we realize. Ancient myths repeatedly speak of dragons of fire, stars falling, sky serpents, fiery birds, burning rains. These symbols may represent meteoric phenomena, not metaphor, but memory. If ancient cultures experienced multiple cosmic encounters, they would naturally encode them in mythology. And if they feared recurrence, they would track the stars, waiting for the cycle to return. Earth's shifting climate. A familiar story. Ancient civilizations did not collapse because they were weak. They collapsed because the climate changed faster than societies could adapt. We are seeing similar patterns today. Droughts in once fertile regions, monsoon shifts in Asia, desertification accelerating across continents, storms increasing in intensity, ice sheets melting at unprecedented rates, sea levels rising, ancient disease vectors reactivating. This mirrors late Ice Age patterns almost exactly. Climate instability triggered migrations. Migrations triggered conflict. Conflict triggered collapse. It is not a prophecy. It is historical physics. When the climate shifts abruptly, civilization becomes fragile. The Great Ocean Warning. Ocean circulation patterns, particularly the AMOC, show signs of instability. If AMOC slows or collapses, Europe and North America could face abrupt cooling, while other regions face extreme heat and drought. This scenario resembles climate events that ended previous cultural eras. The Sahara's abrupt desertification, the collapse of early Middle Eastern societies, the breakdown of large Bronze Age networks, the sudden abandonment of settlements worldwide. Oceanic pulses are slow, quiet, and devastating. If the ancients feared anything, it may have been this. The ocean is not just water. It is Earth's circulatory system. When it falters, the world changes. The risk of seismic reawakening. Just as climate cycles repeat, so do tectonic cycles. Historical records show that large-scale earthquakes and volcanic activity increase in clusters. Rapid climate change can stress tectonic plates through shifting water loads, potentially catalyzing seismic activity. If civilizations flourished during stable epochs and collapsed during geologically active ones, the pattern becomes clear. The Earth destroys what it cannot sustain. Modern seismic monitoring reveals growing activity in the Pacific Ring of Fire, the Mediterranean Basin, subduction zones worldwide. If ancient cultures built megaliths aligned to seismic cycles, as some have theorized, then such alignments might have been warnings of Earth's shifting mood, the fragile foundation of modernity. Now we must confront the most uncomfortable parallel of all. We are far more fragile than we think. Ancient civilizations collapsed with far smaller populations, less dependency on global systems, and cultures more accustomed to survival. Modern society is deeply interconnected, reliant on complex supply chains, dependent on technology, vulnerable to power failure. unable to absorb global shocks gracefully. If a single major catastrophe, natural or cosmic, struck today, the consequences would be far more severe than anything our ancestors experienced. We sit on top of a towering structure of technology, infrastructure, and global interdependence, and the higher we climb, the harder we fall. This is the very pattern ancient myths attempt to teach. Each age rises higher than the last. Each age collapses harder. Each age forgets the lessons of its predecessor. Are we hearing the warnings? Consider, our climate change mirrors ancient shifts. Sea level rise is accelerating, just as in the past. Ocean currents show instability, echoing earlier collapses. Solar cycles are intensifying. Old cosmic debris streams still cross our orbit. Geological activity is rising. Ancient myths and monuments emphasize the same patterns repeatedly. Is this coincidence? Pattern recognition? Cultural memory? Or a genuine warning encoded in the past? We cannot say with certainty, but we can no longer dismiss the possibility that ancient civilizations were not primitive. They were perceptive. They observed the planet. They lived through catastrophes. They studied cycles because their survival depended on it. Perhaps the greatest tragedy is not that their civilizations fell, but that their warnings were forgotten. The responsibility of knowledge. If we stand at the edge of another turning point in the cycle, then we carry a burden our ancestors struggled to pass to us. The responsibility to be aware, not afraid, not fatalistic, aware. Because awareness changes everything. It allows us to prepare. It allows us to adapt. It allows us to break the cycle. If earlier civilizations fell because they could not see the danger coming, then our path, our future, depends on learning from their memory. But to truly understand what may lie ahead, we must first understand what was lost. In the next block, we explore the forgotten technologies, sciences, and philosophies that may have been erased in earlier cycles and what their absence means for us today. If ancient civilizations did leave warnings, and if we are indeed entering another turn of the great cycle, then we must confront one of the most haunting questions of all. What knowledge did they possess that we no longer have? And what did we lose in the silence between the cycles? This is not a question of aliens or impossible machines. This is a question of human genius, knowledge accumulated over thousands of years, knowledge erased by water, fire, ice, and time. Knowledge that may have shaped the earliest civilizations we know, only to vanish when the world collapsed. What technologies, sciences, philosophies, and skills might have existed before the flood waters rose and the sky turned hostile? What secrets died with the lost peoples of Doggerland, the drowned cities of Sunda, the forgotten plains of the Persian Gulf Basin, or the unnamed cultures that walked the earth long before Göbekli Tepe was built? To uncover this, we must trace the shadows, the hints, the inherited fragments that do not fit neatly within the official timeline. Let us walk through them. The architecture of an unseen world. Across the ancient world, we find structures that defy their own archaeological context. They appear too early, too refined, too precise for the societies that supposedly built them. This suggests something profound. Ancient cultures may have inherited architectural principles from an older age. 1. Stone cutting beyond Bronze Age. Capability. Many early sites show stonework that seems out of place. Perfectly flat surfaces, interlocking blocks resistant to earthquakes, drill holes consistent in diameter, polished granite impossible to shape with copper tools, blocks weighing 50, 100, even 800 tons. These appear not as prototypes but as perfected techniques, implying a lost lineage of stone manipulation. 2. Geometry. Without predecessors. Ancient builders used mathematical principles long before mathematics was written down. Golden ratio, pi ratios, sacred geometry, precise alignments to cardinal directions, trigonometric knowledge, geodetic placement over vast distances. Such knowledge does not emerge overnight. It is inherited or rediscovered from older sources. 3. Megalithic symbolism across continents. From Karnak to Easter Island, from Japan to South America, megaliths share strange similarities. Solar alignments, lunar markers, stellar gates, geometric patterns, sound resonance qualities. How did unconnected ancient cultures converge on the same ideas? Independent invention? Possibly, but the global consistency suggests a deeper, older cultural inheritance, a blueprint passed down through memory rather than writing. The lost sciences of the sky. If ancient civilizations left warnings in the stars, then perhaps they once possessed a science of astronomy more advanced than we assume. Not telescopes or satellites, but long-term observation, carried over thousands of years. Imagine a culture with uninterrupted sky-watching traditions for 10,000 years. What would they know? Precessional cycles, planetary conjunctions, cometary returns, seasonal fluctuations, solar rhythms, eclipse patterns, long-term climate correlations. This would not be advanced technology as we define it. It would be advanced understanding, knowledge built from centuries of continuous observation. The forgotten purpose of megaliths. Many megalithic structures act as horizon markers, solstice and equinox alignments, lunar cycle trackers, star rise predictors, seasonal timing devices. To ancient people, this wasn't spirituality, it was survival. If you lived in a world prone to abrupt climate shifts, knowing the cycles of the sky might be the difference between life and death. The night sky as historical archive. Some ancient myths describe stars moving, falling, or changing positions. These may be memories of supernovae, comet debris, meteor showers, atmospheric changes, temporary sky visibility shifts. What if they were not describing myth, but history? If so, ancient people may have tracked celestial events far longer than modern astronomy has existed. The engineering we can no longer replicate. Throughout the world, there are techniques we still struggle to explain. 1. Earthquake-resistant masonry. In Peru, stone blocks fit so tightly together that even a razor blade cannot pass between them, yet the structures have endured massive earthquakes for centuries. 2. Acoustic engineering. Mayan temples and Egyptian chambers exhibit strange resonance effects. Were these intentional, functional, symbolic, or remnants of ancient acoustic science? 3. Hydrology. Long before Rome, the Indus Valley engineered sewage systems thousands of years before similar techniques appeared elsewhere. 4. Monolithic transport. How were enormous stones moved across miles? Logs, ramps, sand? We do not know. We only know that the earliest examples are the largest and most precise. This implies inheritance rather than innovation. The disappearing knowledge of the flooded world. If earlier civilizations lived along coastlines that are now underwater, then much of their science drowned with their cities. We might never recover. Early ports, maritime maps, boat-building traditions, coastal astronomy points, flood markers, navigational tools, written records on organic materials. Imagine if our world drowned tomorrow. What would survive in 10,000 years? Skyscrapers? No. Technology? No. Books? No. Plastic and steel? Gone. Wooden ships? Gone. Digital data? Vaporized by time. Only the largest stone structures would endure. This is why our archaeological record is biased, massively biased, toward young, durable structures. The spiritual science of the ancients. Ancient civilizations were deeply spiritual. But what if spirituality was not merely belief? What if it was a language for encoding scientific principles? Symbolism may have been a storage system for knowledge. Celestial gods, astronomical cycles, flood gods, sea-level change memories, underworld myths, underground refuges, resurrection myths, or cyclical destruction, 7 sages, survivors of a previous world, serpents, comets or cosmic debris, fire gods, solar activity, winged beings, astronomical markers. Ancient mythologies may not have been stories, but systems of knowledge made survivable across millennia, because when writing fails, stories survive. The dissolved libraries of the first civilizations. If early civilizations had languages, writing systems, mathematics, or knowledge centers, we have almost no chance of finding them. Organic materials vanish. Clay tablets disintegrate if unfired. Ink fades. Papyrus decays. Leather rots. wood crumbles. Only in rare cases, Egypt's dry climate, Mesopotamia's clay tablets, did writing survive. If earlier civilizations existed in humid coastal or submerged regions, their libraries dissolved entirely. We may be missing the earliest star catalogs, the first navigation maps, ancient flood records, engineering manuscripts, medicinal knowledge, lost histories of humanity, entire mythic cycles, spiritual systems tied to real events, the philosophical legacy we inherited without knowing. Even without ruins or texts, we may carry ancient knowledge in ways we barely recognize. In ritual cycles, sacred numbers, architectural proportions, calendar systems, mythic story structures, cosmological models, early religious practices, symbolic languages, fragments of an older worldview remain embedded in the foundations of our cultures. We have forgotten the context, but not the content. Humanity remembers in strange ways, sometimes in stories, sometimes in geometry, sometimes in instinct. What the shadows tell us. When we gather all these fragments, the architectural anomalies, astronomical mysteries, submerged ruins, mythic echoes, and inexplicable technologies, we begin to see an outline of the civilizations that may have come before. They understood cycles. They observed the heavens. They encoded their warnings in stone. They built for survival, not vanity. They lived through disasters we can barely imagine. They passed fragments of knowledge forward. And we inherited the fragments without the story. The question now is, what part of the story is still missing? And what final clues did the ancients leave for us before the world they knew was erased? We now stand at the edge of the deepest unknown. We have traced the anomalies, the ruins, the cycles, the disasters, the lost technologies, and the warnings. But one final, haunting question remains. Who were the first civilizations? What did they look like? How did they live? And why did they disappear without leaving a trace? This is the most speculative, most fragile, and most forbidden corner of ancient history, because here, the silence of prehistory becomes overwhelming. Yet even in the silence, patterns emerge, faint, scattered, contradictory, but compelling. To reconstruct these forgotten peoples, we must rely on three sources. 1. Archaeological fragments. 2. Genetic continuity and migration patterns. 3. Myths and oral traditions that preserve memories older than writing. Let us bring these shadows into the light. The ghosts of Doggerland. Imagine a world where the North Sea is not a sea, but a vast green valley filled with rivers, lakes, forests, and settlements. A world where people hunted red deer, fished in freshwater rivers, built wooden homes, carved ritual objects, and traveled by boat across interconnected waterways. This was Doggerland, not a myth, a real landmass, now buried beneath the waves. Archaeologists have found tools, bones, hearths, fishing gear, complex stonework, evidence of large, stable communities. Doggerland was not a fringe region. It was a cultural center. When it drowned around 6200 BCE, a way of life stretching back thousands of years vanished. Its survivors fled to Britain, Scandinavia, and the continent. Some may have carried memories of the flood, memories that later became myths of sinking lands. If Doggerland had early proto-civilizations, then its destruction explains why Europe appears to restart around 6000 to 5000 BCE. Perhaps the people who built Stonehenge were descendants of Doggerland refugees, desperately preserving the sky lore and ritual knowledge of their drowned homeland. The silent builders of Sunda far across the world, another great landmass once existed, the Sunda Shelf, connecting what is now Indonesia, Malaysia, and Southeast Asia, a tropical supercontinent flooded by meltwater between 18,000 and 9,000 BCE. This region was enormous, fertile, and densely populated. It may have been home to maritime cultures, megalithic traditions, early agriculture, symbolic traditions, star navigation, proto-urban settlements. When Sunda drowned, Entire societies vanished under hundreds of feet of ocean. Survivors fled to Malaysia, Vietnam, the Philippines, Australia, India, and maybe further. Some researchers propose that echoes of this lost migration appear in Aboriginal Australian flood traditions, Southeast Asian myths of vanished kingdoms, Polynesian stories of ancestral homelands, Indian myths of long-lost islands. If Sunda held advanced cultures, their disappearance explains the early sophistication of later Southeast Asian civilizations. The mystery of the Persian Gulf Basin. Few people know that the Persian Gulf was once dry, a vast oasis fed by several rivers. Between 75,000 and 8,000 BCE, this basin may have been one of the most hospitable regions on Earth. Its fertile plains could have supported villages, early irrigation, ritual sites, migrations into Mesopotamia. When the rising sea flooded the Gulf around 8,000–6,000 BCE, any settlements there were erased. Later, Sumerian myths speak of Dilmun, a paradise where the sun rises, a land of purity and origin. Was Dilmun a memory of the drowned Gulf world, a homeland remembered through myth? If so, then the Sumerians may have inherited fragments of a culture far older than their own. The shattered peoples of the Andes. The high Andes hold ruins that baffle archaeologists. Tiwanaku, Pumapunku, ancient terraces, underground chambers, ritual monoliths. Some structures appear older than the civilizations that supposedly built them, hinting at an earlier Andean world that flourished before the known cultures. Is it possible that an early Andean civilization existed long before the Inca, long before even the Wari or the Chavin? If so, its roots may lie in a prehistoric culture shattered by climate shifts, volcanic eruptions, or migrations from flooded Pacific islands. Even today, Andean legends speak of a time before the sun rose, of ancient ancestors emerging after a great darkness, guided by shining teachers, Viracocha and his companions, the nomads of the Great Green Sahara. The Sahara was once alive. Between 12,000 and 5,000 BCE, it bloomed with lakes, rivers, savannas, and settlements, rock art shows, herds of cattle, fishing scenes, ritual dances, elaborate religious symbols, mysterious humanoid figures. This was not a desert wasteland. It was a thriving region that could have supported sophisticated culture. When monsoons shifted and the Sahara dried, its people fled. North to the Mediterranean, east to the Nile, west to the Atlantic coast. Some of the earliest Egyptian traditions may originate from these Saharan refugees, people who carried with them memories of a world that dried into oblivion. The unknown coastal civilizations. Perhaps the most heartbreaking truth is this: if the first civilizations lived by the sea, we will likely never find them, because the sea rose and rose and rose. Between 20,000 and 8,000 BCE, the coastline of the world shifted more than the entire height of a skyscraper. Everything humans built near the water was swallowed. Ports, villages, fishing communities, star temples, harbors, coastal trade towns. Their ruins, if they exist, lie under layers of sediment, deep beneath the waves. Today we only detect faint hints. The ruins off India's Gulf of Cambay, the submerged platforms of Malta, the Bimini structures in the Bahamas, strange underwater lines off Yonaguni, anomalous terraces off Greece and Turkey. Are these definitive evidence? No. Are they suggestive? Yes. They whisper of cities lost to the sea, cities we may never excavate, cities that may have been the real first civilizations of Earth. Genetic echoes of a forgotten world. Genetic studies show something remarkable. Humans were far more widespread than previously believed. Ancient gene flows occurred across continents. Isolated populations were connected by unknown migrations. Deep ancestry shared between distant groups. Sudden expansions after bottlenecks. These patterns resemble something familiar, a population collapse followed by a re-expansion, exactly what we would expect after a global cataclysm. The genetic record may hold the faint imprint of civilizations erased by sea and ice. The culture bringers. real or myth? Now we come to the most delicate thread, the mysterious figures who appear in myths after great catastrophes. These stories exist across the world. Viracocha in the Andes, Thoth in Egypt, Oannes in Mesopotamia, Quetzalcoatl in Mexico, the seven sages of Sumer, the Apkallu of Babylon, the Shining Ones of Ireland, the Elder Brothers of the Kogi, the Wandjina of Australia. These beings always appear after a flood, after darkness, after fire, when the world is in ruin. They teach agriculture, astronomy, architecture, laws, medicine, timekeeping. Are these literal gods? Likely not. Are they fictional characters? Possibly. But what if they represent something in between? Survivors, refugees, remnants of older cultures wandering a broken world, offering knowledge to those who remained. How they lived. If we reconstruct the fragments, a picture emerges. The first civilizations likely lived in coastal plains, fertile lowlands, river deltas, lush post-glacial landscapes, maritime environments. They practiced fishing, early agriculture, long-distance sea travel, astronomical observation, ritualized storytelling, stoneworking, group engineering. They built wooden structures long lost, stone monuments now fragmented, coastal towns now drowned, observatories, aligned with stars, communal refuges, underground sanctuaries. They feared the sky, the sea, the cycle, because they had seen the world end. How they vanished. Their disappearance comes down to four unstoppable forces. 1. Rising seas, coasts drowned, towns vanished, cultures died. 2. Abrupt climate shifts, crops failed, herds migrated, people starved. 3. Catastrophic events, comets, solar storms, earthquakes, volcanoes. 4. Time itself, wood rotted, stone eroded, knowledge dissolved. Humanity survived, but the civilizations of the old world did not. Only fragments made it through, and those fragments became the seeds of the civilizations we know. The first civilizations, not primitive, but forgotten. They were not aliens. They were not mythical giants. They were not gods. They were us, earlier versions of us, people who rose in stable epochs and fell when the world turned upside down. Their memory survived in myths, symbols, star lore, rituals, architectural patterns, sacred numbers, underground sanctuaries. But their cities, their histories, their technologies, those are gone, swallowed by water, buried by sand, erased by fire. The final question of their identity. We now understand how they lived. We now see where they lived. We now grasp why they vanished. But one question still remains. What did they leave for us? What final message crossed the cycle to reach our age? If forgotten civilizations once walked the earth, if their cities sank, their libraries dissolved, and their stories fractured into myth, then one final mystery remains. What did they leave behind for us? What messages crossed the abyss of time, enduring fire, ice, water, and oblivion, so that we might understand the world they lost and the world we now inhabit? This is not simply about ruins or relics. This is about intention. Because across the ancient world, certain symbols, structures, and ideas appear not meant for their own era, but for the distant future. For an age with tools to measure the stars, decode geometry, and study the Earth's rhythms scientifically. For us, let us examine the clues left behind, not by chance, but by design. The stone memory of the world. Stone is the only material that can survive tens of thousands of years. It resists fire, water, and time. It endures cosmic impact, tectonic uplift, and even the collapse of civilizations. If the first civilizations wanted to leave messages, they would have carved them into stone. And they did. Göbekli Tepe, a time capsule buried on purpose. Why bury an entire ceremonial complex under thousands of tons of soil? Why seal its pillars, its symbols, its alignments, as if preserving them for a distant age? The deliberate burial of Göbekli Tepe is one of humanity's greatest mysteries. People do not bury monuments without reason. People do not hide knowledge unless they fear it will be lost. Perhaps the builders knew that the next cycle would erase everything. Perhaps they entombed their wisdom for future survivors. Göbekli Tepe reads like a message in stone. Astronomical markers, symbolic animals, potential comet imagery, seasonal patterns, ritual calendars. It is almost as if they wanted someone, someday, to remember. The Pyramid Code. The Great Pyramid of Giza is a puzzle box of perfect cardinal alignment, encoded proportions, geometric constants, astronomical shafts, mathematical ratios, planetary correlations. Egyptologists see symbolism, mathematicians see intention, engineers see impossibility. But what did the builders see? Perhaps a message carved in universal language, mathematics. Math does not erode. Math does not depend on culture. Math does not require translation. If a forgotten civilization wanted to leave a map of the world, a clock of precession, or a record of Earth's dimensions, they would encode it in a structure built to survive the ages. And that is exactly what we find. No writing needed. The stone itself is the language. The global megalith system, from Avebury to Sacsayhuaman, from Malta to Easter Island, ancient sites form patterns too consistent to ignore. Shared characteristics include solstice and equinox alignment, lunar cycle tracking, geometric arrangement, acoustic resonance, star mapping functions, ritual significance tied to cosmic cycles. Are these independent inventions? Perhaps, but their global distribution suggests something deeper, a memory shared across continents, carried by migrations that occurred long before written history. These sites appear almost like nodes of an ancient knowledge network, built to preserve the same message in many forms. The sky does not lie. The cycles repeat. Remember the rhythms of the earth. The sacred numbers that reappear everywhere. Some numbers echo across ancient cultures with uncanny persistence. 12, 36, 72, 108, 216, 432, 2160, 25, and 9 and 20. These numbers correlate with the precessional cycle, celestial mechanics, seasonal rhythms, calendar systems, monumental proportions. They appear in the Vedic texts, the Maya calendar, the Sumerian king lists, Egyptian mythology, Greek cosmology, Norse cycles, Native American stories. How did cultures from opposite ends of the world converge on the same sets of mathematical values? Coincidence is possible, but so is inheritance, a legacy encoded through mythic number systems intended to survive the collapse of language. Numbers are durable. Numbers are portable. Numbers become sacred when their meaning is lost. Perhaps ancient priests preserved these values long after forgetting why they mattered. Perhaps these numbers encode cosmic warnings for future generations. The flood myth as archival technology. Stories outlive civilizations. If ancient cultures wanted to warn the future, they would place their knowledge in the most resilient container, myth. Myths embed information in narrative form. Easy to remember, easy to transmit, even through collapse. Every flood myth shares nearly identical motifs. A world-ending deluge, chosen survivors, a vessel or refuge, a mountain of safety, a rebirth, a warning. This is not coincidence. It is memory, encoded in symbols, repeated for thousands of years. Myths survive when writing dies. Myths cross cycles when cities drown. Myths are the libraries of civilizations without libraries. If the first civilizations fell to rising seas, their descendants would naturally embed their trauma in stories, and they did. Flood myths are not fiction. They are reminders. The civilizer gods as vectors of memory. Nearly every culture speaks of beings who arrived after catastrophe to teach humanity how to rebuild. Thoth, Viracocha, Oannes, Quetzalcoatl, Osiris, the Apkallu, the Seven Sages, the Shining Ones. These figures arrive after destruction, appear mysteriously, possess knowledge, teach astronomy, agriculture, laws, architecture, then disappear? Were they gods, heroes, legends? Or could they have been the last survivors of the previous cycle, wandering the broken earth, passing on fragments of a dying world? If so, then their teachings were the message, a living transmission of knowledge meant to seed the next age. The oral prophecies that warn of returning cycles. Many ancient cultures speak of cyclical destruction. The Maya calendar, the Hopi four worlds, Hindu yugas, Greek ages of man, Norse Ragnarok, Egyptian Zep Tepi cycles, Chinese cosmic resets. The pattern is always the same. 1. A world rises. 2. A world falls. 3. Survivors rebuild. 4. A warning is left behind. 5. The cycle repeats. These traditions may encode real memories of earlier catastrophes, rising seas, volcanic winters, comet impacts, solar storms, climate collapse. They were warnings whispered across time, stories of cycles meant to prepare the next world. The underground libraries. Some of the most mysterious sites in the world are underground. Derinkuyu, Kaymaklı, the Hypogeum of Malta, the Egyptian labyrinth, described by Herodotus. Chavin's subterranean complexes, ancient tunnel systems in Europe and Asia. Why build underground? Protection, preservation, survival. Some of these complexes look less like dwellings and more like vaults, designed to hold people, knowledge, or both. What were they hiding from? And what were they trying to save? The Ahu of Easter Island facing the stars. The Moai statues face inward toward the island, but the platforms beneath them, the Ahu, often align with celestial events. This suggests a dual purpose: honor the ancestors, track the heavens, as if the ancestors themselves were watching the sky. Some traditions on the island speak of a homeland that sank beneath the sea. Were the Moai part of a knowledge system meant to ensure memory survived migration? The universal emphasis on remembering. Ancient texts repeatedly insist that humanity must remember the first time. Egypt, remember the suns before this world. Maya, remember the ages of destruction. India, remember the world that burned. North America, remember the land that sank. Pacific cultures, remember the deluge. Sumer memory was sacred because memory was survival. Civilizations fall when memory is lost. Civilizations rise when memory is found. The final unifying pattern. When we gather all these messages, the astronomical alignments, the geometry, the megalithic networks, the sacred numbers, the culture-bringer myths, the flood stories, the underground sanctuaries, a single truth emerges. The ancients were trying to warn the future that the world resets. Not once, not metaphorically, but repeatedly. And they did everything they could to ensure that someday, far in the future, someone would decode the message. Someone who lived at a time when science existed, archaeology advanced, astronomy matured, global communication was possible. They built for us, for this era, for this moment. They believed the next world, the next civilization, must understand what the last one learned too late. And now we must ask, what were they trying to prepare us for? What is the next cycle? What comes next? If the ancients left warnings for the future, if they encoded cycles in stone, myth, and number, if they watched the heavens with an urgency born of remembering what had once destroyed their world, then the question becomes far more personal, far more immediate. Were they warning us? And if so, what exactly were they trying to say? For centuries, these questions lived only at the fringe, dismissed as myth or mysticism. But today, now that satellites orbit our skies, ocean sensors track rising tides, and climate data reveals patterns that echo ancient collapses, those old stories begin to sound different. They sound less like legends and more like memory, and perhaps, just perhaps, like prediction. We now turn not toward the past, but toward the horizon ahead, to ask, are we approaching another turning of the great cycle? Let us begin with what the ancients feared most: The return of an unstable planet. Civilizations of the past did not fall in slow, gentle declines. They fell suddenly, violently, when multiple stressors converged. The same types of stressors we see rising again today. Across the world, the planet shifts beneath our feet. Abrupt climate swings, melting ice sheets, rising seas that swallow coastlines inch by inch, record-breaking storms and mega-droughts, destabilizing jet streams, ocean currents behaving strangely, ecosystems collapsing. None of this is new. These are the same triggers that ended the lush Sahara, drowned Doggerland, shattered the Indus Valley, and reshaped the first human settlements. The pattern looks eerily familiar. The sky, the ancient source of fear. Ancient myths are filled with imagery of celestial violence, fire falling from the heavens, stars bursting into flames, serpents streaking across the sky, darkness swallowing the sun, cold descending upon the land. For millennia, we dismissed these as poetic exaggerations. But now, modern science paints a different picture. Earth regularly passes through dense comet debris fields. Airbursts like Tunguska occur more often than once believed. Solar superflares, while rare, have happened in the past. Cosmic dust events can dim the sun and disrupt climate. Suddenly, ancient fears look less like fantasy and more like observation, perhaps even lived experience. If earlier civilizations faced skyborne catastrophes, it is no wonder they encoded warnings in their myths and monuments. The sea, the quiet destroyer. Ancient cultures spoke often of a rising ocean, a great flood, a world swallowed by waves, lands sinking beneath the sea. These were not metaphors. Geology confirms them. The end of the Ice Age saw ocean levels rise more than 120 meters. Entire continents vanished beneath water. Doggerland, the Persian Gulf oasis, the Sunda Shelf, ancient Caribbean shores, Pacific land bridges. The world we live in today is a fraction of the world that existed then. And now, once again, the seas rise, slowly at first, then suddenly, when ice shelves collapse all at once. Ancient myths of walls of water may not have been exaggerations, but memories of ice-collapse tsunamis and meltwater pulses, events that can happen again. The Earth, restless and shifting. Early civilizations often built in geologically active regions. Fertile, yes, but volatile. Volcanoes erupt without warning. Fault lines awaken. Mountains crack. Valleys sink. Seas pour into new basins. The same tectonic forces that reshaped the world after the Ice Age continue today. Recently, monitoring stations have detected heightened seismic tension, increased volcanic gas release, unusual uplift in certain regions, magma chamber changes, swarm earthquakes in dormant zones. The Earth is not still. It never has been, and the ancients knew it. The oceans, the great global switch. More than any other system, the oceans determine whether civilizations rise or fall. Ancient collapses often coincided with abrupt monsoon failure, sudden droughts, rapid temperature swings, shifts in ocean circulation. What caused these? Sometimes volcanic eruptions, sometimes ice melt, sometimes unknown triggers we still do not fully understand. Today, scientists observe early signs of a weakening Atlantic circulation. If it slows significantly, Europe chills while the tropics destabilize. If it collapses, a new climate regime emerges in mere decades. Ancient societies lived through such shifts. We may too. The sacred numbers and the cosmic clock. Ancient civilizations repeatedly encoded numbers tied to long astronomical cycles: 12, 72, 108, 216, 432, 2 the 160, 25, and 920. These values match precessional movement, long-term solar cycles, climate oscillations, orbital variations. But why embed them in myths and monuments? Perhaps to preserve a memory that destruction comes not randomly, but rhythmically. The last known global catastrophe, the Younger Dryas event, occurred roughly 12,800 years ago. If the ancients tracked 12,000, 13,000 year cycles, they may have believed another turning was inevitable. The return of ancient symbolism in modern events. Throughout the world today, we witness phenomena that echo ancient warnings. The seas rise, storms grow stronger, deserts expand, rivers shift course, skies behave unpredictably, temperature swings intensify, glaciers retreat at alarming speed. Species migrate in patterns unseen before. This is not prophecy. This is observation, observation that aligns uncannily with what the ancients feared most. Were the warnings meant for us? If ancient civilizations survived catastrophes, if they rebuilt and tried desperately to preserve memory through stone, myth, and number, then perhaps their message was simple. The world changes abruptly. Prepare, not in panic, not in despair, but in awareness. Because the ancients understood a truth we are only now beginning to rediscover. Civilization is a fragile miracle. It depends on stable climate, predictable seasons, reliable oceans, and calm skies. When these shift, the world resets. The moment we stand in. So where are we in the great cycle? We cannot say for sure, but we can recognize the signs the ancients emphasized. The sky shows unusual activity. The seas rise. The climate destabilizes. The earth shakes. The winds change. The poles melt. The seasons drift. The world becomes volatile. These are not predictions. They are conditions. Conditions that match previous eras of collapse. Conditions that civilizations ignored at their peril. The test of our age. Unlike the forgotten civilizations before us, we have tools they never dreamed of. Satellites, global communication, scientific instrumentation, planet-scale data, advanced models, international cooperation. But tools mean nothing if we do not understand the past. The ancients tried to speak to us. They left warnings everywhere, in stone, in myth, in geometry, in numbers, in alignments, in architecture, in stories passed across thousands of years, messages that say, we faced what you now face. We watched the world change. We survived. Barely. Remember? The final question, before the final two blocks. If ancient civilizations were erased by the turning of the great cycle, and if they left us warnings so that we might avoid their fate, then everything leads to one final question. Will we listen, or will we forget, and repeat the cycle once more? If forgotten civilizations once rose and fell, if their memories traveled through myth, stone, and silence, if they watched their world collapse and tried desperately to warn whomever would come after, then we stand at a crossroads their voices once knew well. A moment of tension between what was and what may come. A moment where the choices of a civilization determine whether it becomes a foundation for the next age or another ghost swallowed by time. To understand our present, we must finally face a question as old as humanity itself. What do collapsing civilizations leave behind? And what do they try to teach the next world? The answers do not lie in temples or ruins. They lie in patterns. Patterns left by the fallen ages, repeating through time like echoes of a forgotten rhythm. The ancient parable of complacency. Every civilization begins with adaptation. People observe the land, predict the seasons, follow the migrations, and build according to the rhythms of nature. Survival requires humility, but when prosperity grows, memory fades. Comfort replaces vigilance. Expansion replaces caution. Ancient stories repeat the same pattern. A people become confident. The world seems stable. Warning signs are ignored. The cycle turns. Catastrophe arrives. Again and again, myths describe leaders who mocked the sky watchers, ignored the elders, dismissed the priests of astronomy, or silenced those who remembered the catastrophes of the distant past. The lesson woven through thousands of years of storytelling is painfully simple. Civilizations fall when they forget. The fragility of stability. The parable of the watchers. Among the ruins of ancient cultures, a recurring archetype appears. Not a warrior, not a king, not a god, but a watcher, a guardian of memory, a keeper of cycles, a figure who knows the signs and warns the people. In Egypt, they were the priests of Zep-Tepi. In Sumer, they were the Apkallu sages. In China, they were the sky watchers of the Shang. In Mesoamerica, they were the readers of the long count. In the Andes, they were the astronomer priests who watched the solstices. Their role was not spiritual. They were scientists before science, archivists of the heavens, observers of the earth, custodians of memory. But in almost every tradition, the watchers are ignored before the fall. Why? Because their warnings challenge the illusion of permanence. And permanence is the most seductive lie ever told to a civilization. The fragility of greatness. When we imagine ancient collapses, we picture epic disasters, fire, flood, earthquakes, cosmic strikes. Yet most civilizations fall quietly at first. Not in fire, but in failure. Failure to adapt. Failure to remember, failure to see that stability is not a natural state, it is a temporary gift. Before the final collapse comes a long forgetting. The great cities of the Indus Valley faded as rivers shifted, slowly at first. The Maya world thinned as droughts stretched across centuries. Bronze Age kingdoms unraveled as trade networks snapped under simultaneous pressure. Each collapse began with small cracks no one wanted to acknowledge. Each believed itself eternal, and each left its warnings encoded for whoever would come next. The parable of the survivors. The true legacy of collapsed civilizations is not in the ruins. They are in the people who survived. In every story, after the destruction, a remnant emerges. A small group, a lone voyager, a wandering teacher, a family fleeing the flood, a leader guiding survivors into the mountains. These figures carry what little remains of the old world. Stories, symbols, rituals, mathematics, fragments of astronomy, memories of cycles, whispers of what came before. They cannot rebuild the old world, but they can seed the next one. This is how knowledge travels across ages, not in libraries, but in human hearts. The parable of rebirth. Every ancient myth tells the same story. After destruction, the world is reborn. Not instantly, not gloriously, but slowly, through adaptation, migration, and the persistence of memory. Göbekli Tepe rises not as the birth of civilization, but as a memorial of one that came before. Çatalhöyük appears not as the first city, but as the echo of older settlements now erased. Sumer is not the beginning, but a reconstruction guided by fragmentary memory. Egypt's Zep Tepi is not a myth of gods, but a story about the distant past, before the flood. Every rebirth is guided by the faint ember of the previous age. What the fallen warn us about ourselves. Now, standing thousands of years later, we must examine the one mirror that ancient civilizations left polished for us. We are repeating their patterns. We have grown confident. We believe stability is our birthright. We trust that cities, systems, and networks will endure. We assume technological power can overcome natural cycles. We forget that nature erases everything eventually. The ancients whisper from the ruins, "Do not mistake power for permanence. Do not mistake comfort for safety. Do not mistake forgetting for progress." Their lessons are not predictions of doom. They are reminders that civilizations must be humble, or they will be humbled. The part of the story they hoped we would hear. What did the ancients desperately want us to understand? Not fear, not paranoia, not inevitability, but responsibility. The responsibility to study the world we depend on. The responsibility to remember what happened before. The responsibility to prepare for cycles, climatic, cosmic, geological, that do not care about human timelines. The responsibility to become watchers again, not as mystics or prophets, but as caretakers of memory. The parable of choice. Every fallen civilization faced a moment like the one we face now. A moment when the world changed faster than expected. A moment when the signs became clear. A moment when people had to decide how to respond. Some adapted, some migrated, some resisted, some denied, some remembered the warnings. Most did not. And history tells us this truth. Collapse is not guaranteed. Collapse is chosen through inaction or arrogance. The ancients left their wisdom not to frighten us, but to give us a chance they did not have. The last message of the fallen ages. If we listen closely to the myths, the ruins, the numbers, the alignments, the symbols, they all whisper the same message. Prepare, adapt, remember, because the cycles will turn regardless of whether we pay attention. But the outcome, whether we collapse or endure, whether we vanish or transcend, is still in our hands. What comes next? We have traced the rise of the lost civilizations. We have followed their fall. We have uncovered their warnings. Now we face the final question. What does all of this mean for us and for the future of humanity? We have reached the end of this long journey, a journey through ruins buried by time, through myths breathed across millennia, through oceans that swallowed entire worlds, through cycles of destruction and rebirth that shaped humanity long before writing, history, or memory. And now one question remains, a question older than civilization itself, a question whispered by the stones of Göbekli Tepe, by the drowned plains of Doggerland, by the vanished cities of the Indus Valley, by the deserts of the Sahara, and by every forgotten culture whose echoes linger at the edges of time. How many civilizations came before us, and how many more will follow after we are gone? This is not a question of science versus myth. It is a question of humility, the realization that humanity's story is not a straight line, but a vast spiral, a repeating rhythm of rise and collapse, awakening and forgetting, creation and destruction. And perhaps we are not at the beginning. Perhaps we are not even in the middle. Perhaps we are simply one civilization among many, each separated by oceans of time, each erased by cycles larger than any empire, larger than memory itself. The planet does not remember us, but we can remember ourselves. As we look back across the tens of thousands of years we explored, one truth becomes clear. Earth does not preserve history. Earth erases it. Continents move, oceans rise, skies burn. Ice grinds the land to dust. Volcanoes wipe the slate clean. Rivers rewrite the map. Wind wears mountains into sand. If another civilization lived 20,000 years ago, or 50,000, or 200,000, the Earth would have erased almost every trace. Only the greatest stones would survive. Only the deepest myths. Only the strongest numbers, symbols, and ritual patterns. And that is exactly what we find. Monuments too advanced for their time, stories too universal to be coincidence, cycles too precise to be imagination. Perhaps the ancients did not give us answers. Perhaps they gave us questions. Questions strong enough to survive any collapse. Who were the people before us? Were they wanderers on endless green plains? Were they sailors charting coasts long since drowned? Were they astronomers watching the sky with fear and fascination? Were they engineers carving stone so precisely that their work outlasted glaciers? We do not know their names. We do not know their languages. We do not know their stories. But we know this. They lived. They built. They loved. They feared. They watched the world change. They tried to save what they could. They tried to remember. They tried to leave something behind for us. And we found it. We, the distant descendants of their memory. What destroyed them? Not one disaster, but many. Not one cause, but a convergence. The seas rose. The skies darkened. The earth shook. The cold returned. Fire rained from above. Food vanished. Cultures scattered. Memory fragmented. Civilizations do not fall from a single blow. They fall when everything changes faster than they can adapt. And perhaps that is the greatest warning the ancients left us. Civilization is not guaranteed. It must be protected. What did they leave behind? Not machines, not cities, not libraries. Those could not survive. Instead, they left the only things that could endure: stone aligned with the sky, numbers hidden in myth, cycles encoded in story, symbols carved into temples, underground refuges preserved in silence, visions of floods, fire, darkness, and renewal. A whisper: we were here, remember us. And now, for the first time in our age, an age of satellites, telescopes, deep-sea mapping, and global science, we can finally understand what they tried to tell us. What do we do with their message? This is where the story becomes ours. If the ancients survived cycles of destruction, then so can we. But only if we pay attention. Only if we honor the memory they fought so hard to preserve. Only if we understand that our age, like theirs, will one day be tested. Where do we stand in the great spiral of time? Perhaps we are at the height of a cycle. Perhaps we stand at its edge. Perhaps the world is changing beneath our feet even now, slowly, quietly, inevitably. But this is not a story of doom. This is a story of continuity, a story of endurance, a story of humanity rising again and again, stronger each time, wiser each time, leaving gifts for the next world to discover. The final reflection: the civilizations unseen. Stand at the shore of any ocean. Look at the horizon. Remember that beneath those waves lie entire worlds. Cities, villages, rivers, mountains, temples, stories. The first chapters of human history written in mud, stone, and bone, now lost to time. Stand in any desert. Feel the heat of the sun. Know that beneath your feet lie layers of forgotten ages, eras when the desert was green, when rivers flowed, when people built and dreamed and feared the sky, just as we do. Stand at any ancient site, Göbekli Tepe, Stonehenge, Giza, Malta, Tiwanaku, and feel the silence. The silence is not emptiness, it is memory. Memory waiting for someone to listen. The closing question, left not for the past, but for us as the world turns into a new age, as the cycle continues, as humanity faces the same forces that shaped and erased those who came before. We must ask ourselves, how many civilizations rose and fell before we opened our eyes? How many will rise after we close them? And what will we leave behind for the next world? If the ancients taught us anything, it is that civilizations are temporary, but wisdom can be eternal. If we choose to preserve it, if we choose to remember, if we choose to listen,